Night clung to the north like a second skin, a dark, silken mantle stitched with wan stars that blinked through the ragged cloud cover. The air was brittle, the sort of cold that pried at joints and memories alike, yet atop the shattered eastern spur of the wall Jon Snow scarcely felt it. Wind combed through his black hair and tugged his cloak in slow, wandering spirals. But his mind drifted farther than the gale, backward through half-remembered battles and forward into half-dreamed tomorrows. Ghost padded at his side, silent, watchful, and tense, hackles rising whenever an errant gust slipped between ruined merlons like a whisper that had forgotten its tongue entirely. Far below, the ghost forest stretched northward, a kingdom of shadowed boughs and frost-stricken pines. Jon had once trod those glades hunting whites, had bled there and burned there, and still he heard the hush of their needling branches whenever he closed his eyes. Tonight that hush felt different, less like the hush of things awaiting death, and more like that of something waking, remembering its name. The thought disturbed him more than white-eyed corpses ever could, for corpses were simple foes. You killed them, or they killed you. But ancient names and ancient powers? They took their own shapes and rarely asked permission. He inhaled, tasted the scent of smoke from the braziers 40 feet below, and exhaled white fog. Somewhere behind him, men spoke in hushed voices, arguing about the timber quota for the next phase of rebuilding. The wall would never stand 1,200 feet again, yet they meant to raise something, an emblem of resolve if not of impenetrability. Jon felt their hopes crusting like ice upon the stones, but wondered, as always, whether walls truly kept horrors out or merely trapped people in with their own illusions. A feather-soft chime threaded across the night, no louder than a child's sigh, yet so piercing it slipped under the mind's guard. Ghost froze. Jon's breath hitched. He turned, scanning wind-polished drifts, broken ice, shifting shadow. Nothing. Stillness spun out long and thin, and the hair on his arms stood on end beneath the furs. When nothing answered, he told himself he had imagined it. A trick of nerves, a strain of old grief. Nevertheless, unease clung to him as he descended the ice ramp toward the courtyard. Below, torches sputtered in iron sconces. Black cloaks and northern leathers moved through half-lit corridors of half-built ramparts. Masons cursed softly at stubborn stones, while rangers checked bundles of dragonglass arrows bound for the outposts springing up like saplings along the old border. Jon offered nods, murmured approval, and walked on. He had learned that a king, though he still recoiled from the title, was best served by quiet footsteps and sharper listening than speaking. The men's voices braided behind him in talk of lumber, hoarfrost, and debts owed to the winter town for smoked hair. All ordinary, all deceptively alive. At the gatehouse, 2 watchmen muttered about a raven that had arrived from Winterfell bearing odd news. A disturbance in the Wolfswood, deer wolves howling in numbers rumored extinct, small folk reporting feeling watched by the trees. Jon's pulse quickened. He thanked them, dismissed them, and took the message to his quarters. There, in the silence broken only by the soft scrape of Ghost's claws, he read Sansa's neat, uncompromising hand. She did not exaggerate. Bran had slipped into a waking trance beside the heart tree, and spoken a single word not heard in the tongues of men for thousands of years. It had sounded, Maester Wolkan reported, like "Hooray," though the shape of the syllables hurt the ear to hold. Jon folded the parchment slowly. Bran's visions had guided them through the worst of the war for the Dawn, but he rarely spoke in unknown languages, even when lost in green sight. The old tongue of the children of the forest, perhaps a language older than the wall, older than Maesters, older even than the first pack. Was it invitation or warning? He wrote replies, instructed cautious patrols in the Wolfswood, and set Ghost to guard the ravenry lest any dark-feathered spy slip free. Yet when at last he collapsed onto the straw mattress, sleep refused him. His dreams drifted across crimson-leaved branches, down cold streams glimmering with phosphorescent motes, into caves where roots drank from black stone. A chorus of tiny, fluting voices called his name. He woke drenched in sweat that chilled to ice before the cressets. South of the neck, Dawn struggled through a gauze of sea mist to find White Harbor. Lord Davos Seaworth leaned over the mermaid's balcony, tasting salt on the air, nostrils flaring like sails catching wind. Gulls tilted over ships of every shape, but his seasoned eyes fixed upon a single carrack, edging into port. Its sails shimmered silver-green as if woven with weirwood leaves. Its hull bore carvings of owls, deer-wolves, and spiral sigils, older than House Flint's oldest charter. No figurehead rode its prow. Instead, a living tree, gnarled, bark as pale as moonlit snow, grew from a cradle of carved roots, branches pruned so they would not snap in strong gales. The sight slipped slivers of memories into Davos' mind. Shireen's smile by candlelight, Melisandre's dark readings of the flames, whispered stories of children with eyes like pools of gold who had vanished into the deep woods long before the first ships from Valyria found Dragonstone. He wrapped his rough cloak tighter as the carrack slid past the breakwater. White Harbor's customs officers hailed it in the common tongue and received only silence. Lines were cast, moorings secured, but no gangway lowered. The watchers on the quay shifted like nervous horses. Then something moved amid the branches, the smallest tilt of a leaf-shrouded figure. Not a man, not even a dwarf. Smaller, slighter, its limbs slender, as reeds yet coiled with subtle strength. Mossy green skin dappled by sunlight, hair the color of bronze leaves. It looked toward the city's white granite walls, and for an instant, Davos imagined he felt its gaze meet his across the harbor. Heart thudding, he touched the carved stagbone finger clasp at his throat, a habit whenever he prayed. But no prayer shaped his lips, only wordless awe. He left the balcony at once, boots thumping down stairwells, orders tumbling from his mouth to a page half awake. Summon the Manderleys. Send fast riders north and south. Then, almost as an afterthought, prepare guest quarters free of iron. Why he could not say, but the instinct felt as solid as any tide. Far to the west, in the depths of the Wolfswood itself, leaf-strewn stillness broke beneath the feet of Arya Stark. She moved with the hush of falling snow, Braavosi whispers guiding her steps, though she wore no mask this morning. Nymeria paralleled her to port, barely a flicker of gray amid the bows, leading a pack whose eyes glimmered like scattered embers in the half-light. The direwolf's return had been a tapestry of blessing and burden. The small folk whispered prayers of thanks and terror in equal measure. Wolves kept worse things at bay, yet even their guardianship could feel like oversight from living shadows. Arya knelt beside the remnants of a campsite, ashes cold, prints fresh. She hissed through her teeth, prints of men, steel-shod. But there were other impressions too, lighter than a deer's tread, five-toed and narrow, pressing scarcely into the loam. She brushed a finger along one, felt an odd warmth as if the ground there still remembered the pulse of whoever had left it. A song, high and plaintive, thrummed at the edge of hearing. Nymeria whined, ears flat. Arya turned her face toward a cluster of ancient weirwoods deeper inside the forest. Their white trunks wove together like the bones of sleeping giants, crimson leaves trembling though no wind stirred. She rose, fitted fingers around Needle's worn hilt, and followed the silent invitation. The path narrowed, until even the direwolves had to weave through. Shafts of milky light pierced the canopy, illuminating motes that twisted in patterns too deliberate to be dust. Arya felt as though those motes studied her, weighing truths she could no longer name. She did not flinch. Truth, she had learned, was a blade best offered point first, and never hidden. At the clearing's heart stood a heart tree older than Winterfell itself, roots coiling around a dark pool that mirrored nothing at all. Before its face knelt a child. No, not a child, not truly. Limbs slender, skin the hue of living willow, eyes molten gold. It sang under its breath in words that brushed Arya's mind rather than her ears. When she stepped forward, it stopped, tilting its head with bird-like curiosity. She sensed more presences among the gloom, forms that flickered in and out of sight like moth wings. Leaves rustled, though air was still. The stranger stood, no taller than her chest, and raised a hand shaped between branch and flesh. On its palm lay an acorn whose shell glowed faintly from within. Arya held out her own palm. The gift weighed nothing, Yet when it touched her skin she felt winter run out of her bones and spring take its place. She could not speak. Words were too slow, too thick. Thoughts flowed instead. Images of burning villages, of men with pale blue eyes, of castles crying smoke. And then images of tangled roots, drinking light, of shadows weaving knives of obsidian, of harmony struck upon the heartwood of the world. The being, Leaf, she realized, though not the Leaf Bran had known, yet of the same people, spread slender fingers, and without mouths moving, shaped a promise between them. The forest had not forgotten its children, no matter what skin they wore. In Winterfell's Godswood, Bran stirred upon his wheeled chair, eyes washing pure white before clearing once more. Sansa sat nearby with parchment clutched in gloved hands. The chill had bitten so hard even her practical courage welcomed thick furs. She watched Bran with the uneasy affection of one who loves a brother, yet cannot entirely believe what lives inside him now. When his pupils returned, darker than raven's wings, he exhaled a breath that smelled faintly of green leaves and wet earth, impossible in midwinter. His voice, when it came, possessed an echo like wind through caverns. "They are nearer than the heartbeat of the wood," he whispered. "Nearer than our own fears." He blinked. Confusion folded over omniscience, so swiftly it made Sansa ache. The singers' voices rise again. "They have need of us, and we of them." "Nani." Sansa pressed quill to parchment. More ravens, more grain stores, rerouted to the Wolfswood villages. More armed search parties, guided by trusted rangers. Yet some part of her quailed. The realm had scarcely healed from dragons and dead things. Could it bear the weight of sorcery older than grief? "My lady," Maester Walken ventured from beside the weirwood trunk. "Should we inform the Citadel? Such revelations belong in annals lest they be lost." Sansa's blue eyes flashed a steel flake. "The Citadel sent fewer than a dozen glass candles when we fought the Night King." She folded the Raven report. "Let them wait. This is Northmen's business for now." Bran half smiled. Not at Walken, not at Sansa, but perhaps at the tree itself. Not just Northmen's sister. All who still breathe upon this continent are bound to what comes. His gaze slid past moss-draped branches toward the smoky south. All will be asked. In King's Landing, morning cast a thin veil over charred walls and the half-rebuilt Red Keep. Queen Daenerys Targaryen paced the length of a sun-washed balcony, newly quarried from dragonstone granite. Her footsteps echoed like distant drums along the scorched courtyard stones. Drogon's vast shadow swept overhead, wings beating slow as millstones while laborers below paused, shaded eyes, and whispered half in worship, half in dread. Daenerys paused only to savor the moment that hush widened. It was not vanity, she told herself, merely a reminder that the new realm's peace, fragile as a moth's wing, depended still upon fire and fear. Yet when Tyrion Lannister arrived, curls damp from an early bath, to wash away another night's wine, fear shadowed his mismatched eyes more deeply than any memory of dragon flame. He carried a message tube of pale heartwood, a weirwood stave grown around copper inlays shaped like leaves. She frowned. Such craft belonged to myths. "The North sends riddles now?" she asked, accepting the tube. "No," Tyrion said softly. "History sends warnings." Within lay a roll of thin bark upon which lines in an angular script shimmered green gold, as if inked with summer's light. Daenerys could not read them. Tyrion offered translation. A summons to the heart of the Kingswood on the next moonless night, signed only with a sigil older than ravens, 2 spiraling lines meeting at a single leaf. She felt a prickling along scars left by her own prophecy, the blackened throne room of ash and sorrow. "Do I ride to parley?" she murmured. "Or to judgment?" Tyrion's reply was a shrug heavy with weariness. "Perhaps both. If the children of the forest truly walk again, ordinary diplomacy may prove insufficient." He poured wine he had sworn off yesterday and drank. "Pray their notion of justice is kinder than ours." Samwell Tarly's candle burned low in the vault beneath the citadel, pooling wax in concentric circles, like tiny white castles defending dwindling flame. Around him, stacks of crumbling scrolls formed ramparts of another kind, fortifying his resolve against ignorance more than any sword could. Gilly slept, propped against a codex on pre-Valyrian heresies. Baby John nestled within crook of her arm. Sam's quill scratched on fresh parchment, translating passages from a text so old it predated the first men's runes. It spoke of a pact beyond the pact, the day of green promise, when the singers swore to return not out of vengeance, but remembrance, should the world's balance tip once more toward the oblivion of endless night. He paused, fingers smudged with green pigment, heart thrumming. Return. That single word had lain dormant longer than the wall itself. If signs north and south agreed, and by every raven's report they did, the singers were stirring. But promises born of magic rarely came without cost. Sam adjusted spectacles, fought a yawn, and read further. The final stanza chilled him more than the stone floor. When men forget the language of leaves, the leaves shall teach it anew, first with whispers, then with roots, and last with rivers of crimson. Sam blotted his quill. Whispers had begun, roots were rumored in haunted groves. What, then, would crimson rivers look like? He did not want to know. He leaned back, bones protesting. Somewhere above, bells announced dawn over Old Town's spires. The world kept waking, whether prepared or not. Dusk shivered over the riverlands, and a lone farmer guided his ox through frost-whitened barley stalks. He hummed an aimless tune until his breath clouded gray, and the ox refused its harness, lowing fearfully toward a stand of birch. Curious irritability gave way to creeping dread when the farmer saw saplings bending, though no wind drifted. Shadows pooled thicker, birthed a form low to the ground, gleaming with emerald eyes. It spoke without voice, and the farmer felt the words inside his marrow rather than in his ears. "Go home. Bar your door. Remember the old songs." He fled, stumbling past his own threshold, slamming the bolt so hot splinters flew. His wife asked what demon had chased him. He could not answer. He only wept as unseen flutes sang in the faraway dark. No lord would learn of that encounter for days. By then, similar tales had spread, quietly at first, then in mounting waves, across the Trident's banks, along the stony shores of the Vale, even beneath the red dunes outside Sunspear, where travelers claimed vines erupted overnight from dry riverbeds and bloomed ghost-white flowers that closed again by morning, leaving soil damp with dew that resembled tears. North of the Neck, Jon Snow rode through a corridor of ancient pines whose trunks crowded like silent jurors. 8 sworn brothers followed, each bearing dragon glass, each glancing at the trees with the uneasy city men, reserve for tight alleyways. Ghost moved ahead, fur-brushing ferns that righted themselves after he passed. Occasionally the direwolf paused, sniffed, and uttered a rumble deep in his chest. Jon felt it resonate against his calf like a distant drum. The forest thickened until day itself grew drowsy beneath the canopy, and when the company halted at a creek, the water ran clear as window glass, yet reflected nothing beneath its surface but an endless, moonless sky. Jon knelt, dipped a gloved hand, and felt warmth. Impossible. Arresting. He closed his eyes. A music, unlike any instrument, pulsed through the earth, steady as a heart, ancient as the first snowfall. He rose slowly, scanning the gloom. Shapes shifted beyond peripheral sight. Small, quick, more plant than flesh. No threat emanated, only expectancy so intense it bordered reverence. One of his men, Prentice Flowers, muttered a prayer to the seven. Jon raised a hand for silence. "Lay aside iron," he said quietly. "A wish to speak, we must listen unarmed." The brothers obeyed with reluctance, steel sliding from sheaths to rest against moss. Then from the darkness stepped a singer. Copper leaves braided its hair, and its eyes glowed like distant suns filtered through green water. It looked upon Jon as though seeing an echo recalled to life. Small though it was, dignity radiated from it in palpable waves. It placed a slender hand upon the trunk of an ash tree, and the bark rippled, forming a sigil carved in living wood. A spiral of 9 whorls, the gap at its center shining like a window into dusk. Jon sheathed Longclaw fully. "I am Jon Snow, son of..." He stopped, considering the weight of names by which men sorted world itself: Stark, Targaryen, King, bastard. None felt suited here. I am of the pack of Winterfell, he said instead, and that seemed to please the singer. It reached toward him, not touching, yet in that gesture Jon felt winter give way to the first sigh of spring somewhere deep in memory. A voice formed within his skull. Wielder of Dawn's promise, heed. The word thrummed like an arrow in flight. Another image flooded him. Ice melting atop black stone, roots splitting keeps, towers crumbling into fertile ground. Life rising from destruction. And beyond it all, shadows coiling on a distant horizon. Not whites this time, but something subtler and perhaps more terrible. Greed armed by memories of conquest. Crowns hammered from dragonbone and grief. The singer withdrew its hand. Jon understood nothing plainly, yet he knew with bone-deep certainty that the fate of men, children, and trees was again intertwined. Arya emerged from the wolf's-wooded dusk, acorn tucked into a pouch at her throat. Wolves fanned behind like gray ghosts. They would not enter Winterfell's walls, but watched as she crossed the drawbridge. She found Sansa overlooking courtyards where new recruits trained with spears tipped in dragonglass, Gareth Serwyn drilling them. Sansa raised a brow at the sight of the pouch, but Arya spoke first, voice low. "They're here." Sansa's composure cracked only slightly. "How many?" "Enough to fill the forest with songs." Arya brushed pine needles from her cloak. "They mean to speak to Bran, through the trees, or maybe through me." She hesitated, unsure how to describe the certainty blooming her ribs like dawn fire. "They're afraid too, Sansa. Something moves in the far north still. Not dead men, but something the singers call the Hollow Shadow." Arya shook her head. "I don't understand." Sansa's blue eyes narrowed, thoughts racing between duty to people who still scraped for daily bread, and the vast unseen war whispered by seeds and sap. "We cannot fight shadows with swords," she murmured. Arya smiled, a knife-thin smile. "Maybe with roots we can." Deep beneath the Isle of Faces, waters lapped rhythmically against limestone ribs, hollowed by ages of patience. In a chamber, lit only by bioluminescent lichen, a council gathered. Children of the forest, hundreds, perhaps, sat upon intertwining roots that formed natural benches. Their faces bore scars of fire and ice, yet their eyes held star silence. At the circle's heart grew a single weirwood whose tears were not red sap, but droplets of pure light that drifted upward and dissolved. Before it stood Leaf, eldest of living singers, hair strewn with petals that never withered. Her voice, when at last it rose, echoed across the cavern and beyond, slipping into every heart tree on the continent. "Long have we kept faith with green and growing things. Long have we endured the axes of men and the fire of dragons. Yet the balance breaks anew. Blood seethes in the soil where none should. And in that blood something stirs, old as the world's first wound, hungry as its last." She lifted a handful of dust ground from black stone. "Dragonglass. We birthed this weapon once to bind the cold. Now cold births another weapon of its own design, neither living nor dead, woven from the echo of light-eating flame. Men name it greed. We name it hollow, for it devours the voice of the world and leaves silence behind." A murmur fluttered like wings through those assembled. Leaf spread her hands. "So we must keep the second promise. We must stand beside the pack of men who remember songs of trees. We must teach, guard, and if need be, bleed, for when ice and fire war again, only seed may mend the wounds." Roots trembled. Outside, every weirwood's painted face wept fresh crimson. And in castles, camps, and crossroads alike, people woke from uneasy dreams to find leaf shadows dancing across their ceilings, though no moonlight shone. Days stretched into weeks. In White Harbor, the Singer crew sailed without oars, guided upriver by currents that obeyed silent flutes. Manderley bannermen lined embankments, gawking. Davos escorted 3 singers beneath the Wolf's Den arches, where even the oldest stones seemed to sigh in greeting. The singers offered gifts: sea glass spheres containing trapped starlight, white acorns that sprouted the moment they touched soil, and songs that made the river's flow brighten as though reflecting dawn at midnight. In return they asked only safe passage, the absence of iron, and candles made from bees that fed on heather. Lord Manderley agreed, perplexed but dazzled. In King's Landing, Daenerys rode into the Kingswood at new moon. Fires could not stay lit along the path, yet Drogon circled above, eyes shimmering violet at the edges. Halfway in, torches died completely. Ulmarine moats lined the ground instead, illuminating her party with ghost lantern glow. Singers emerged to meet her. They spoke not in words but through visions, a world where dragons no longer scorched earth, but warmed seedlings, where the Iron Throne dissolved into fertile hillocks growing forest of glassy fruit. Daenerys wept without tears, remembering Meereen's pyramids, Aestapor's charnel streets. When at last she returned to the city walls, her stride held new tension, between Crown's Weight and Gentle Spring. In Old Town, Grand Maester Orwyle reluctantly opened the Citadel's vaults to Sam, granting him leave to disseminate translations of the Pact of Leaf and Stone. Younger maesters scoffed, but the gray-robed novices listened, their dreams turned root-bound afterward. One novice kissed the oak outside the conclave, and claimed it whispered her true name. But not all hearts leaned toward harmony. In the ruins of Harrenhal, a council of dusky figures gathered beneath towers melted like wax. Some wore crimson cloaks of dwindling Lannister power, others black scales of a null brotherhood that had sworn to extinguish sorcery after the War for the Dawn. At their head stood Sir Jeremy Riker, face half-scarred by white fire, his empty eye a sapphire orb of captured ice. He spoke of valor, but bitterness tempered every syllable. When kings consort with tree spirits and wolves patrol the roads, what place remains for men? He demanded. We survived the dead only to kneel to roots. Murmurs of agreement rippled. An Ironborn captain slammed a fist onto a stone table. Give me axes, not acorns, he spat. I'll show these green demons how we greet invaders. Riker's eyeless socket glimmered. Axes, yes, but forged of black steel tempered with secrets stolen from the wall's foundations. The only edge that bites both flesh and sorcery. He lifted a sword of shimmering darkness. The hollow shadow has gifted us arms. We need only the will. He drove the blade into the ground. The earth recoiled, grass bleaching to gray in a widening ring. Far north, beyond the fields of perpetual winter, Tormund Giantsbane trekked through white silence toward the Frostfang caves. Still, a king among free folk. Though he disdained the title, Tormund carried news of restless glaciers, of lights swirling out of season, amber not green, and of animals wandering south long before heavy snows. Wildlings believed portents thick as crow droppings, and every portent whispered the same dread. Night was coming again, but wearing a face men had not yet named. It was in a cavern rimed with hoarfrost that Tormund found proof. A stone monolith, smooth as obsidian yet warm to the touch, pulsed with slow crimson veins. It hummed when he approached, a low thrumming he felt in teeth more than ears. On its surface glimmered spirals within spirals, but twisted inward, as though devouring themselves. He spat, muttered curses, and fled. 2 days later he crossed paths with a singer no higher than his waist. It looked at him, and sorrow weighed its ageless eyes. It touched his wrist, giving him a shard of translucent crystal. Inside burned a pale green flame. Carry the seed, the singer thought into his bones. When the eye of Hollow Night opens, cast it into the wound. Tormund nodded, though he did not understand. A mission, at least, was something a free man could hold. In Winterfell's library, Bran laid out maps inked with constellations, river routes, and weirwood clusters. Jon, Arya, Sansa, Davos, and Sam gathered while singers darted like flickering candle smoke around them, occasionally adjusting a symbol or adding a spiral that only Bran seemed to decipher. The world is tilting, Bran stated, voice calm yet thunderous in import. Not toward ice nor fire alone, toward emptiness. He pointed at the arbor. Vines wither overnight. To the Dornish marches. Sandstone sweats black dew. To the shivering sea. Storms gather but do not break. His finger landed upon a mark, newly etched in dark ink at Harrenhal. Here, The hollow shadow's servants gather iron and grievance. Jon leaned, brows knit. Can we confront them? Not by swords alone, Bran said. Swords will be needed, but the first battle is for story, whose song the world will heed. Their blade is void. Ours must be memory. Namshunor. Sansa inhaled, mind vaulting through logistics. Ravens, alliances, grain stores, morale. Then we cast story wide as banners, she said. Every holdfast, every hearth. Let them remember the children saved us once and may do so again. Fear cannot be given soil. Arya's smile flashed lethal. And if story fails, I still have needle. Sam cleared his throat. There is a ritual in the pact of leaf and stone, the sharing of waters. It bound the first men to the singers when last they warred. It might bind us again. He pushed spectacles up nose. But it requires a weirwood sapling planted in the very heart of men's power. All eyes turned to Jon. His refuge atop the wall suddenly felt far away. King's Landing, he murmured, where the Iron Throne stands now. Daenerys' letter had arrived that morning. She would come north to parley with children of the forest on the first thaw, bringing Drogon. Jon imagined planting a weirwood amid fire-blackened courtyard stones while a dragon watched. The notion seemed impossible, and exactly the task the world demanded. Bran nodded as though hearing his thought. We have moons, not years. He closed eyes white as snowfall. When the weirwood bud bursts blood-red within the broken castle, the hollow shadow will strike, and then we must be ready. Root, claw, flame, and heart. Across Westeros, preparations quickened. Smithies forged dragonglass arrowheads by the wagon-load. Septus and singers wove prayers into tapestries destined for ruined halls. Farmers sowed barley between standing stones on Mander's banks, where the soil suddenly felt rich despite frost. Not all answered the call. Many hid behind thick walls, nursing suspicions stoked by Ricker's agents. Yet where wolves howled and heart trees dreamed, people found courage blooming again. One starlit night, Arya met Jon on the battlements of Winterfell. Snow feathered down, melting on their cloaks. She handed him the glowing acorn. They say plant it in the courtyard of the Red Keep, she whispered. When it grows, it will sing the old songs loud enough to drown the hollow. Jon accepted it, warmth throbbing through his palm. Memory flashed, his father's voice telling tales of the first men and weeping trees, of oaths sworn and kept. For the first time in months, he smiled without shadow. We'll see it done. Arya punched his arm lightly. Try not to die again. It's getting repetitive. He laughed, and the sound felt alien but right, echoing across stone. Below them, the godswood rustled, the wind lay still. Leaves turned skyward, as if listening to something far above the clouds. And in the distance, a low hum rose. Woodwind and heartbeat combined, carried southward on winter's breath. In the deeps where daylight had never dwelt, the hollow shadow's architects poured molten black steel into spiral molds. Crimson sparks hissed upon frost-rimed floor, sizzling like dying stars. Riker watched, one eye gemstone, the other dark with ambition. Let them sing, he whispered. Let them plant their pretty tree. We'll water it in blood, and when its roots drink void, the world will belong at last to men alone. Behind him, the monolith from the Frostfangs throbbed louder, crimson lines pulsing in hungry cadence. At its base writhed something neither stone nor flesh, clothed in spirals that devoured torchlight. It opened an eyeless gaze upon the forge, and every flame bowed inward. Moonlight silvered the steeples of the Sept of Baelor, now a hollow husk of cracked marble. Under its broken dome Daenerys dreamed uneasy dreams, forests sprouting from dragon bones, children with eyes like lanterns dancing upon Drogon's back. The Iron Throne melting not in fire this time but in flowering vines. She woke before dawn, heart racing. Footsteps outside. A messenger from Storm's End, reporting vines overgrowing battlements overnight, leaves in shapes like tiny hands cupping invisible light. She rose, donned riding leathers, and ordered her Khalasar to make ready. The North called, and this time she would answer not as conqueror, but as caretaker. And beneath every weirwood on Westeros, roots tightened, listening. Songs older than grief, threaded through loam and limestone, weaving paths for sap and memory alike. The children of the forest had returned, not as saviors born of kindness, but as guardians compelled by promise older than broken crowns. Their whispers passed through heart trees into dreams of men and women across the realm, stirring half-forgotten reverence. The world braced on the cusp of a new story, a tale not of thrones, but of threads entwined, of leaf and claw, of steel and void, of flame tempered not to burn, but to warm. In that hush before dawn, every creature, every stone, every seed seemed to pause, aware of the fragile silence between heartbeats. For it was within that silence the first note of the final song would rise, and in its rising decide whether Westeros would bloom anew, or fade, root and crown alike, into endless shadow. Gah! Snow melted in faint rivulets along the low courses of Winterfell's inner walls, each droplet catching torchlight and casting motes of gold across dark stone. The courtyard lay restless with preparations. Cartwheels creaked beneath casks of pitch and sacks of rye. Blacksmiths hammered night-colored steel until the anvils rang like cracked bells, and teams of carpenters rasped new hafts for axes meant to shear more than wood. Yet beneath the bustle lurked a hush as palpable as candle smoke. The hush of a keep listening for omens that did not arrive on wings but on roots. Jon Snow stood near the old well, watching the men of the watch, not his watch, yet always his, test the balance of dragonglass pikes. Above, banners of gray direwolf and silver trident brushed the lingering ice from merlons, and when wind snapped them taut, they sounded like distant sails. Here and there he caught a singer moving amid soldiers, small, willow-limbed, eyes bright as mountain dusk. They spoke little, yet each motion wove quiet suggestion, a nod that shifted a firing platform 2 feet left to spare an unseen root, or a raised palm that stilled hammer blows just as iron would have bitten living grain stored for spraying. Most men obeyed without understanding. Those who asked found answers delivered in images rather than words, and soon decided wonder was lighter to carry than knowledge. Across the courtyard, Arya sparred with Jane Poole. Their blades flickered between sun-bright parries and lunges, needles sewing glittering threads through the air. Arya's focus, once a blade's narrow edge, now held the breath of wood and wolfsong. When she moved, the breeze seemed to bend round her, as though guided. Jane struck high, overreached, and Arya stepped inside the arc without a footfall, tapping the other girl's throat. Both froze, eyes bright with shared exhilaration rather than victory or dismay. They laughed, startling a raven perched on the belfry. It croaked, flapped, and wheeled south, as though carrying the echo of that laughter to corners where none had yet dared believe in mirth. Inside the great hall, Sansa met with Ryon Mallister and Lady Barbary Dustin. Charts of grain yields, roads half-broken by thaw, and lists of lords pledged or sullen spread like patchwork across the long table. The singers had taught Sansa to read the subtle warp of tree rings in heartwood tokens they offered as gifts. Now she traced those warps upon her maps, seeking where rot might set in men as it did in sap. Her voice, when she spoke directives, bore quiet authority, less a command than a certainty that drew agreement like water up a root. Lady Dustin, who once would have sneered, nodded contemplatively, fingers drumming a slow approval. In the godswood, Bran waited beneath the heart tree, skin pale as the face carved above him, eyes half closed. He did not warg now. Instead he listened to a multitude beyond counting, every whisper in leaf tongue spiraling toward him like green smoke. A singer named Moss wove tiny braids into Bran's hair while murmuring counsel only his quiet mind caught whole. Shaggy dog lolled nearby, larger than any wolf of mere blood, breath steaming against crisp air. Through Bran's stillness pulses of knowledge reverberated outward, drifting along weir networks to groves as far as Skagos and as near as the half-acre of young saplings, planted by Ned Stark years ago in memory of lost reeds. The trees remembered. Southward leagues beyond count, the King's Road unfurled under a bright new sun. Its stones, cracked by dragonfire and time, now bore caravan after caravan bound north. At their head rode Queen Daenerys, astride a stallion, the color of fresh milk, greaves of Valyrian fold steel glimmering under her cloak. To her right paced Bark Rose, blood rider to the last, muttering at every frost patch. To her left cantered Tyrion on a black Garin that disliked his scent of ink. Behind them trailed unsullied columns, sigils of Storm's End, Highgarden, Sunspear, and even House Tarth sewed into paired standards. Each standard bore a green spiral, crossing a crimson sunburst. Men asked what banner it was. Tyrion answered wryly that it meant hope and compromise, which in his experience were best marched together lest they fall out along the way. Nights by the campfires unfurled like stories within stories. Singers, they refused titles or ranks, brought flutes carved of driftwood. Unsullied drummers kept heartbeat cadence. Dothraki strings soared, and in the spaces between instrumentation, the realm's different tongues braided into a single incantation of worn-out yearning. Old enemies sat shoulder to shoulder eating hare seasoned by Dornish peppers. If bitterness remained, and it did, it softened under starlight freshened by flute song that spoke straight to marrow. At Maidenpool, the convoy rested 3 days while ships landed fresh timber and barrels of resin. The singers took root beneath a weeping willow by the harbor mouth, and all night its branches glimmered as though dusted with emerald. Come dawn, the willow had grown 2 feet, and its slumbering waters teemed with silver minnows where before there had been sludge. Fishermen gaped, then set to clearing refuse. By noon, the docks bustled with nets newly mended, as though the world sought to tidy itself for what came. Not all Hobosongs was so kind. East of Maidenpool, the Null Brotherhood dragged blades of black steel across innocent ground. Seeding fear, Riker called it. They rode without torches, fires banked cold as their creed. Villagers who glimpsed them saw only shadows with crimson eyes and fell to muttering prayers to whichever god promised distance. Behind the riders lingered a smell of iron tang and earth gone sour, and in some places even the grass turned brittle gray at dawn. Cattle refused pasturage there. Birds flew circles rather than perch. The land itself recoiled. At Harrenhal, hollow fog-wreathed towers half-slumped from Aegon's wrath. In the long gallery where cinders still hung in slow motion above melted columns, Sir Jeremy Wrecker addressed envoys from disgruntled houses. He pointed to slag-run stones that had once been proud walls. Here kings burned for arrogance, he said. Yet dragons returned and men bent the knee anew. Now trees sing, and they would have you bend again. He walked among them, black steel blade balanced across 2 gauntlet palms. Bend if you must, I would rather break. More than one lord eyed him with fear disguised as fervor, and one by one they laid strangers' coins at the base of the monolith. The monolith had grown. Crimson veining formed runes none could name but all felt, like a mouth waiting to exhale. At times it pulsed, and the entire keep shivered as though struck by subterranean thunder. Spiders fled its chamber. Owls would not hunt near the ruins. And sometimes, if one listened too long, echoing cries rattled in the pillars, cries that sounded like children weeping beneath stone. Wrecker claimed they were only memories fading. Yet even his bravado faltered when the newest shipment of ore arrived, and the monolith's glow brightened as though tasting blood. He swallowed revulsion, called for more laborers, and sharpened his resolve. Balance must be restored by mankind's own hand, and if void was the tool, so be it. Back in Winterfell, Samwell Tarly hunched over a cask of viscous amber fluid, distilled from resin gifted by the singers. Within it floated flecks of pale green. When stirred, they spun miniature whirlwinds. Sam meant to coat arrowheads, but first he recorded every step. The precise weight of resin, deerbone ash ratio, temperature. Gilly fetched parchment after parchment, coaxing baby John to ink his little finger on the margins for luck. Each time Bran felt a tremor through the roots, he sent a page to Sam, who answered with more formulas. The great library of Winterfell burgeoned overnight, as if books bred by moonlight. One evening, as Sam strained the elixir through starched linen, Lady Lyanna Mormont arrived. She appraised his bubbling cauldron, the scorched ring around it, and Sam's ink-smudged cheek. "Is it safe?" she asked. "As safe as dragonfire in a jar," Sam replied, then considered. "Which is to say, no." Lyanna grinned. "Good. Give it to me." She left with a crate, and by dawn Bear Island's archers dipped fletchings into glimmering liquid whose scent recalled both pine sap and thunderclouds. That night, Sansa dreamt of her mother kneeling by the trident, water lapping copper-colored around her skirts. When she awoke, tears wet her cheek, yet she felt not grief but fierce calm. She donned a cloak the hue of mists at dawn and strode to the battlements, where timing of relief watches fell under her new schedule. Every sixth bell, a singer walked each patrol route, exchanging a pine cone for a pebble from the men. A ritual meaningless in speech, but drenched in unspoken treaty. Jon received ravens, one from White Harbor naming rivercraft en route with singer seeds, another from the Erie where Lord Robert, after long seclusion, pledged 100 eagles trained to carry dragonglass claws, a third from the Stormlands bearing the Baratheon stag entwined with a reef-knotted branch. Alliances sprouted quicker than spring radishes. Still, he brooded at dusk. Ghost nudged him as he walked the outer rampart. The direwolf's red eyes glowed in the gloom, and Jon laid his palm against the great beast's ruff. "Soon," he murmured. "Soon enough we go south. We plant the seed in stone and pray it finds soil." Ghost whined, resting his muzzle on Jon's thigh, sensing the coil of doubt. That same moonset, 2 rangers galloped from the Wolf's Wood, urging immediate audience. They had found a glade where frost refused to settle, though night air iced their beards. In its midst stood a figure they first thought a child until it raised both hands and the ground rippled, uncovering a black stone shard veined in crimson. The rangers described how the air around the shard sucked heat. How one man felt memories slipping, names of sisters, the smell of mother's bread, until the singer laid a hand upon his brow, and the memories returned. The shard, the singer told them, is void root. Cut it and memory bleeds, leave it and memory sleeps. Then she bade them ride for Winterfell, for icebound soil had begun whispering of a wound growing south, drawing breath. Jon consulted Bran. Bran's eyes clouded and he winced. "The shard is kin to the monolith," he said after. "Hollow shadow seeds, planted to feast on what makes the living alive." He stared into flames. "If too many awaken, men will stalk the realm half-souled, and no promise will bind them." Jon clenched fist round the acorn pouch. "Then we plant life, faster than they plant emptiness." Bran nodded. "But life requires trust. Trust costs more than blood." 3 days' ride north of Harrenhal lay villages whose roofs sagged under creeping gray. Ricker's outriders arrived at dusk. By dawn they found entire hamlets deserted, doors gaping, meals moldering mid-table. Footprints led to woods where tree trunks bore gouges shaped like spirals reversed. Scouts returned shaken. They had seen no bodies, only shadows drifting against bark like stains. Ricker ordered the remains burned, void light fertile silence. His black steel bladesmiths toiled through nights forging heavier axes that hummed a sub-aural dirge. With each forging the monolith brightened. Some claimed to see silhouettes moving in its core. Ricker forbade such talk and doubled the forge quota. The more the stone drank, the stronger his conviction that men could own destiny by excising sentiment, history, nature itself, whatever demanded genuflection. Slaves to gods no longer, he preached. Men would rule as hollow kings filling emptiness with empire. Unbeknownst to him, a single sparrow, tiny, brown, unremarkable, hid in the melted rafters. The bird's left eye flickered green. When Ricker dismissed his assembly, the sparrow flitted into moonlight and soared north, wings beating like tiny hearts of oak, bearing images Leaf herself awaited. East of the Neck, Brienne of Tarth marched with a contingent of Stormlanders, escorting wagons laden in seeds that glowed faint jade. Podrick Payne rode beside her, humming a camp song off-key. When they arrived at Moat Cailin, the singers greeted Brienne with solemn courtesy and guided her to a stone dais half-submerged in marsh. There they presented her with a sword. It appeared ordinary iron until moonlight struck it, and glyphs shimmered along both flats. Podrick gasped. Brienne lifted the weapon, tested its weight. It felt no heavier than Oathkeeper, yet pulsed like a heartbeat against her palm. A singer touched the blade. Steel forged with memory. Every vow ever spoken before this moat leaked blood. It thought sang into her. When you wield it, speak truth, or it will fall dull. Brienne nodded gravely. She had no fear of truth. She and Podrick led the wagons north across a causeway thrumming beneath wagon wheels. Where seeds spilled accidentally, reeds flowered thick overnight. Frogs sang deeper. Cranes nested on half-ruined watchtowers and kept eyes facing east, as if awaiting something men had not yet perceived. Beyond the wall, humans seldom ventured since its fall. Tormund and his free folk scouted pockets where voidroot crystals sprouted from permafrost. They smashed scores with warhammers, but each shard's shattered birthed a soundless scream, and afterwards the air smelled like graves long unmarked. The singers standing among them wept sap tears, then sowed fistfuls of white seeds that burrowed and glowed. A day later, moss sprouted on rock older than language, and snow hares returned. Tormund clapped the nearest singer on its twig-slender shoulder. "Green folk, good folk," he pronounced, and the singer blinked, unsure whether to bow or laugh, then did both in sequence. Mid-journey along the King's Road, Queen Daenerys encountered an encampment of small folk streaming from Crownland's hamlets. Their faces bore smudges of soot and confusion. They spoke of a black mist rolling down from Harrenhal's direction, suffocating crops and whispering regret into ears of newborns. The queen ordered healers to their care, gave each family a singer-blessed acorn, and bade them travel behind her host toward Winterfell, where warm hearths awaited. Tyrion observed quietly. At last he said, "You once liberated slaves. Now you shepherd refugees with saplings instead of swords." Daenerys met his gaze, calm as still water. "Perhaps," she answered. "Freedom and refuge were never different things." That night, Drogon roosted east of the road, on an outcrop of broken boulder. A trio of singers approached, palm up. Drogon's golden eyes followed them, his nostrils flared. They placed tiny vials of golden resin at his talons. The dragon inhaled, and warmth radiated across the clearing so fiercely grass charred, then instantly greened again. Tyrion blinked tears at the heat, unsure whether to fear or worship. The singers whispered soundless gratitude for fire song harnessed to life's cause. And Drogon in answer unfurled wings as vast as starlit night, before settling into watchful slumber. When the procession reached the next northern verge, Jon Snow rode south to meet it under skies pinked by late winter dawn. He swung off his speckled gelding and clasped Daenerys' forearm first, then embraced her fully. Old distrust cooled under newfound resolve. Arya hugged Tyrion, half jest, half sincere, then pilfered his coin purse to test reflexes, and returned it before he noticed. Podrick flustered. Brienne rolled her eyes affectionately. Council convened beneath oaks on a slight rise. Bran arrived borne by Hodor's cousin, still silent, but his presence lent weight. Singers ringed the council, standing as still as saplings. Facing them all, Jon produced the acorn. At twilight he planted it in a clay bowl filled with soil from Winterfell's god's wood and sand, from Dragonstow's beach, ice and fire mixing at the root. The singers chanted in the language men could not share, and when the last syllable faded, a single thread-like shoot emerged, red-green, luminous. Arya exhaled awe. Sansa touched her brother's arm. Bran's eyes widened as he watched the seed splice through time. "We carry it to King's Landing," Jon said. "Plant it before the moon turns." He looked at Daenerys. In the courtyard where dragons died, and the throne melted. Daenerys saw memory of ashes there, but also glimpsed fresh leaves unfurling. "We ride at first light," she replied. Yet distances shrank for void as easily as breath. The sparrow reached the Isle of Faces and Leaf heard its tale. She gathered counsel, then stepped into the heart tree's trunk and emerged that same dusk at Winterfell, bark opening like gentle cloth. Bran greeted her with a touch of foreheads. Their thoughts mingled, worlds colliding in an instant's hush. She warned of monolith growth, of blades that consumed memory, of Riker's march. Bran's face hardened. He means to strike the convoy en route. The hollow shadow thinks to sever route before it reaches stone. John listened, hands curling. He ordered scouts east and west, but Leaf shook her head. Their path does not follow road nor river. They ride storms in human skin, appear where doubt blossoms. You must guard trust. That is the path they cannot tread. She turned to Arya. Night dances where your feet choose. Walk ahead unseen, and so calm. There. Arya donned a gray cloak, whispered farewell, and vanished between pine trunks before anyone thought to ask how she'd slipped through two armies unseen. Somewhere west of the King's Road, night fell sudden. Campfires flickered, unsullied tightened ranks. A hush swept tents. Dogs whimpered, horses stamped. Steel rasped from sheaths, but sound felt swallowed. Then, from woods, a soft clang. Metal striking metal with no urgency, no haste. Men peered, torches raised, saw only darkness between birch trunks. Brienne stood sentinel near the supply wagons. Podrick beside her. Steadied, quivering spear. From the gloom stepped shapes cloaked in black steel. Spirals etched across cuirass. Their swords reflected torchlight only to break it, sending shards of dullness scattering. Captain Grey Worm barked order, unsullied formed square. A figure advanced, tall, face hidden by helm shaped like a howling void. It lifted, one gauntlet. Silence deepened until Brienne could hear her blood. Voice emerged like grinding stone. Lay down roots and die. Lay down trust and live. The ultimatum hung, fouling air. Grass at the figure's feet browned. Brienne strode forward, memory blade glimmering. We lay down neither, she said. The shadow laughed, a soundless convulsion that made torches wane. Then, battle sparked. Black steel met ordinary steel, and sheared it like damp parchment. Unsullied staggered but reformed, thrusting spears seeking joints. Every wound made by black steel leaked not blood but smoke eddying back into forged edges. Singers darted among lines, touching injured men, singing counternotes that slowed bleeding and reignited memory in eyes gone dazed. Drogon thundered overhead, but archers loosed void-tipped shafts that struck his flank. Wounds sizzled bleach-white, and the dragon roared wrath. Daenerys mounted regardless, climbing harness as flames licked sky. Tyrion shouted protests swallowed by wind. She urged Drogon into a banking dive. Firestorm lit the gloom incandescent. Trees burst like torches. Void riders scattered. Yet the tall figure strode unburned. Sword raised, flame splitting round its edge, as water round stone. Then from between two wagons slipped Arya, shadow thin. Brienne saw only flash of needles point as Arya pricked the tall rider's calf where Grieve met Sabaton. A simple wound. So simple it should have meant nothing. Yet blood, when it welled, was not red, but star-specked blackness. The rider faltered, turned, but Arya melted back into dark. Brienne seized the moment. She leapt, bringing memory blade down. Edge met void steel with a ringing clang unlike any sound of smithy. It was chime, lament, and benediction in one. Sparks flew, colored not orange but vibrant green. Void steel fractured. A scream blossomed from the sword itself. Not throat. Then the blade shivered to dust. Rider staggered, helm tumbling to reveal a man's face half devoured by nothingness. Cheekbone core out. Eye a pit. Brienne's second stroke ended him. Body collapsed, dissolving to ash that drifted upward like sooty snow. Seeing their champion fall, other Void Riders wavered. Grey Worm seized initiative, driving the square into wedge that split enemy line. Archers in reserve loosed dragonglass arrows coated in resin. Upon impact, each arrow bloomed small green fires that clung to black steel armor, eating it with gentle ferocity. Riker's men fled into woods where torches could not follow. Silence returned like panting breath. Flames guttered. Injured groaned. Drogon settled, wings mantling protectively round Daenerys as she dismounted, eyes scanning for Arya. The little wolf slipped from shadow, smear of smoke on face, and nodded once. Daenerys touched her shoulder. Silent thanks. They counted losses, 10 unsullied, 4 Stormlanders, a singer whose essence slipped peacefully back into root at first dawn. Many wounded. Yet hope remained. The acorn still lived, leaf unfurling broader under night stress. Far away, Ricker felt the monolith pulse with anger. He reeled, blood trickling from ear. He cursed weakness, rallied smiths, demanded forging quickened. The monolith answered with brighter light, its crimson veins spidering across chamber walls now, drinking torchlight. When one smith collapsed, sobbing memories of childhood drained, Riker bade another drag him away. Void makes room, he muttered. Yet doubt pricked him. If one convoy could blunt his vanguard, what of the combined strength marching now? He ordered spies south, bribed sellsword companies to harry Queen's peace. He sent assassins with black-etched daggers into taverns, where talk of trees outgrew talk of taxes. Each killing left spirals drawn in blood upon tables. Fear spread, yet so did resolve. For every house cowed, 2 found courage renewed. At last the host reached the burned gates of King's Landing, charred timbers replaced by raw pine, still smelling of sap. Silent crowds lined streets as unsullied cleared path to the Red Keep, partly rebuilt, partly ruins of fused rock. Drogon circled overhead, casting tremulous shadows. In the courtyard where ash once fell like snow, Jon knelt and pressed the bowl's sapling into earth prepared by masons who quarried stone until veins answered root. Singers formed circle, hands linked. Bran sat at the broken throne's base, pupils pure moon. Daenerys, unhelmed, hair streaming silver, placed her palm on Drogon's snout and whispered, "Remember." The dragon lowered head until horn ridges touched ground. Leaf stepped forward, sang the first line of the oldest song. It spoke of dawn before dawn, of light bargaining with dark. Other singers joined, their voices interwove chimes, storms, lullabies. Arya, Sansa, Sam, Brienne, Davos, Grey Worm, even Tyrion, added their own tongues. Bits of lullaby, onion seller's prayer, high Valyrian dirge, half-remembered Braavosi sea shanty. Words were less important than intent. Intent wove across thrumming air like rootlets beneath soil. The sapling shimmered. Leaves unfolded, crimson-veined. Trunk thickened by the heartbeat. Within an hour, a young weirwood 6 feet high stood where dust once reigned. Crowds gasped as its bark smoothed into a face. A new face, female, eyes closed in dreaming calm. Its tears dripped milky onto scorched flagstones. Each drop hissed, soot fizzing away to reveal stone of palest gray. Where molten dragonfire had carved scars, new grass sprouted, tiny white blossoms shaped like 7-pointed stars. Bran opened eyes, tears tracking. "The sharing of waters begins," he whispered, voice layered by others. "All who wish wholeness drink." The trees' tears gathered in rivulets, pooling within broken throne's hollow seat, now stripped of jagged blades. The iron throne had been melted, but its basin served a new chalice. Jon stepped first, cupping hands, drank. Coolness spread, bearing clarity, humility, but also steel resolve. Daenerys hesitated, then drank. Visions danced. Burnt children, freed slaves, dragons soaring over green fields, yet pain softened into possibility. Crowd advanced in wonder. Even Lannister orphans once hunted by unsullied tasted drops. Wounds old and new eased, not erased but accepted. Bells told themselves, wind clanging iron tongues. In that ringing peace, Ricker struck. He led 200 Void Riders through the city's western breach at nightfall. They carried no torches, walls around them dimmed as they passed. When they reached Flea Bottom, cobbles cracked, laughter died, dogs whimpered. Atop a mound of rubble, where Sept had crumbled, Riker brandished a long glaive forged from monolith core itself. Its tip oozed smoke, and where it passed air tasted of old regrets. He raised it skyward. In answer, the monolith miles away roared soundless shockwaves. Every shard hidden across land pulsed. Sleeping villagers woke screaming names they could not recall. Void blossomed. Within the Red Keep, The weirwood flickered as candle under gale. Bran gasped. The hollow opens. Jon drew Longclaw. Daenerys vaulted onto Drogon. Grey Worm marshaled, unsullied. Singer troops took position, along walls. Arms raised, murmuring. Ricker's vanguard surged up the hill, voices chanting nothingness. Black steel clanged shields gone dull of color. Then, from an alley, Arya darted into their midst, slashing tendons, vanishing. From ramparts Brienne swung memory blade, carving arcs glowing green. Tormund charged down the city steps, free folk roaring behind. The clash shuddered the night. Ricker advanced unhurried, each stride laying thumbnail-sized void seeds that burrowed instantly. Stone dimmed. He paused before the courtyard gate and lifted glaive horizontally. A wave of silence flattened defenders. Atop a parapet Jon steadied. He felt roots beneath soul, heard Weirwood's fear and courage both. He raised hand. Singers answered, focusing hum through leaves. Sapling brightened, cast pale halo. Silence fragmentarily broke. Drogon loosed torrent of fire over attacking line. Flames struck Glaive's arc, bent aside. Ricker laughed. Flamelight exposing half-corpse cheek. He spun the weapon, sending vortex of inverted light tearing ground. Men thrown like rag dolls. Stone quivered. Leaf stepped onto courtyard lip, palms up. She sang single pure note. The weirwood tree flared, tears falling in steady rain. Wherever droplet touched void seed shriveled, releasing memory stolen before it rooted. Spectral apparitions of children laughing, lovers' promises, a mother's lullaby. All spilled into air, then flew toward hearts of living defenders to reside once more. Riker felt strength ebb. He roared, charging. Jon leapt to meet him. Longclaw rang on glaive shaft. Sparks of silver and black spiraled upward. Each strike pitted courtyard with craters of frost or bloom of summer grass. Around, combat devolved into small duels. Brienne shielding Grey Worm from 3 void knights. Davos dragging wounded Singer to safety. Tyrion firing crossbow quarrels tipped with Sam's resin, each bolt riding bright trails. Drogon landed behind Ricker, jaws widening. The glaive speared upward, lodging in pallet. The dragon shrieked, recoiled. Daenerys flew from saddle, rolling. Riker lunged after her, glaive reversing overhead. Arya burst from beneath fallen beam, needle into his unguarded side. Again, void blood seeped, and the glaive shimmered, ugly violet. He spun, knocking Arya aside. She struck wall, crumbled. Jon's rage sparked war green in his eyes. He thrust Longclaw. Ricker parried. Almost. The Valyrian blade skated past shaft, slicing gauntlet. Ricker faltered. From wall, Sansa cried. Now! Several singers hurled vials that shattered on Ricker's armor. Resin cascaded, bile bright. Ricker tried brushing it away. His gauntlet sizzled, melted. Memory blade soared from Brienne's hand, spinning end over end, lodging square in his chest. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Ricker screamed, a sound of worlds tearing. The glaive fell, clanging. Void fissures raced across armor. Flesh. Stone beneath. His form imploded, swirling into miniature storm of ash and echo that wavered, clutching to remain. Leaf stepped close. She touched swirling ash, whispered syllable beyond speech. The storm collapsed into seed, the size of a teardrop. She handed it to Bran, who sealed it inside knot of fresh wood on the weirwood's trunk. Bark closed. The courtyard sighed, as though city itself expelled long-held breath. Dawn crept over bay, painting sky rose. Survivors helped wounded. Singers chanted healing chords. The weirwood's face opened eyes, the color of dawn mist. It regarded wreckage, then smiled. Not in triumph, but tender grief. Months unfolded like petals beneath newborn sun. Void seeds unearthed were encased within living heartwood, guarded by joint watch of Night's Watch resurrected and singers. Black steel weapons, those reclaimed, were melted in dragonfire so hot metal vaporized, leaving only glass pools that cooled into opaque mirrors no one dared gaze into. Under spreading limbs of the weirwood court, a new assembly met. Men, women, singers, free folk, marshmen, even an Ibonese envoy. They drafted the Charter of Green Promise. It forbade forging weapons to steal memory, required each stronghold to plant at least one heart sapling tended without iron for 50 paces, and proclaimed no crown held right to silence song of leaf or beast. Some lords balked. Yet when the weirwood's tears turned sanguine at their descent, their protests died soft. Daenerys abdicated claim to sole sovereignty, instead accepting title Warden of Skies, steward to dragons and firecraft DDN. Sansa, named Lady Protector of the North Realm route, oversaw moots where children of the forest spoke through translators. Jon refused titles still, but served as first Shadowbinder, walking borderlands where void shards might sprout and guiding root singers to heal them. Tyrion, elected Recorder of Promises, kept annals in a tower grafted with living vines. He wrote often of laughter returning to streets, of bread tasting sweeter, of bells ringing in concord rather than alarm. He also penned caution. That emptiness, once birthed, never vanished, only slept. Vigilance must tend story as gardeners tend orchards. Neglect invited rot. Brienne founded an order dubbed the Leaf Knights. Their oath: speak truth, defend memory, let root run deeper than blade. Pods of trainees recited vows amid flowering courtyards grown where ash heaps once smothered lilies. Each bore a seed-etched token that glowed faint when hearts strayed from honor. Arya roamed still, sometimes seen on Braavosi Quay speaking to catspaws who sought names. At ports where ships moored, she left tiny spirals etched into railings, reminders that the song spanned seas. On a spring dawn, ghost-white petals drifted across King's Landing. Children chased them, squealing. One petal landed upon Tyrion's inkpot. He lifted it, studied delicate veins forming shapes of rivers and roads. He laughed softly. In the margin of his ledger, he wrote a single line. When the forest came to save us, it taught us how to save ourselves. Far beyond the horizon, on islands wrapped in summer storms, new shoots broke black volcanic soil. They carried memories yet unspoken, songs yet unsung. For while Hollow Night had been bound, night itself would always return. But so, leaf by leaf, would dawn, and beneath the world, roots whispered, Iga. The seasons turned, though slowly, as if the world itself paused often to remember. Spring came to Westeros not as a fanfare of blossom and brightness, but as a careful thawing. Snow shrinking into glimmering puddles, brown shoots nosing up through frost-hardened earth, and winds shifting from knife-keen to whisper-saw. The war had ended, not with coronation or conquest, but with a planting, and from that seed, a realm unlike any before had begun to take shape. In the halls of Winterfell, the old and the new now lived side by side. The ravens still came to roost in the rookery, though now they often arrived with messages penned not just in ink, but etched into slender bark strips, glowing faintly with moss-green light. These came from the Singer Groves, newly rooted far beyond the neck, and their arrival was always met with silence and reverence. For the trees did not waste words, and each message bore the gravity of memory long remembered. Jon Snow rose before dawn most mornings, not out of duty, though duty still clung to him like a second skin, but because the silence of pre-dawn suited him. He walked alone through the frost-tipped courtyard, past the godswood where the weirwood tree had grown new limbs toward the sun, and down to the outer walls, where the banners of unity fluttered in rhythms matched to spring's breath. Ghost padded silently at his side, ever vigilant, ever near. He had not taken a crown. The North called him king still, in quiet voice and respectful glance. But Jon had refused thrones and scepters. His was a rule of quiet decisions, of tending not just land and law, but also healing. The people came to him with grievances and fears, but more often now with stories, requests for blessing over new buried seeds, or for judgment where Singer law brushed against human need. Daenerys Targaryen, no longer queen in name, but still dragon rider and steward of skies, dwelled in the upper terraces of the Red Keep. The throne room had been transformed into a sanctum of glass and growing things. Vines crawling across scorched stone where once blades jutted from the iron seat. Drogon roosted atop the highest peak beyond the bay, and in the clear hours of morning, his shadow would pass gently over market stalls and the laughter of children. The people of King's Landing had changed too. In the alleys once echoing with fear and cruelty, now grew moss and flowering ivy. Not because the city was no longer dangerous, it had not become perfect, but because its roots were now watched. Small folk planted white acorns beneath stone altars. Septons and singer priests often debated over cups of goat's milk stout, but most had learned to speak with one another, not over. Arya had vanished again. Her absence came as natural as her presence. Sudden, purposeful, with no word left behind but with impact lingering. She had ridden west to explore the Broken Arm and the Summer Sea Isles where legends said forgotten forests still whispered in the old tongue. Brienne, now Lady Commander of the Leaf Knights, often read Arya's sparse dispatches aloud to trainees. Each letter carved with short, direct words and hidden sharp wisdom. In Dorne, the sapling planted in the shadow of Sunspear had bloomed red blossoms along its branches, petals soft as wind but resilient as heat-hardened iron. There, the Sand Singers gathered, their songs mingling with green dream harmonies. It was said that under full moons, the sand would shimmer faintly green, as if remembering waters long lost. And yet not all wounds healed with rain and time. Beneath the ruins of Harrenhal, the remnants of the Hollow Shadow whispered still. The monolith, though sealed, pulsed faintly on rare nights when moons waxed and waned in mismatched rhythm. Bran the Dreamer had woven roots round it like a cage, and Samwell Tarly had built a vault of crystal above, where memory could be watched but never touched. On the southern tip of the Vale, Lord Robin Arryn had become more man than child, less sickly and more thoughtful. He wore a spiral of green and silver instead of house, Arryn's plain falcon, and in his eyrie, he kept counsel with both mountain lords and singer envoys. He had declared that the moon door would never again be used for judgment, but instead remained sealed with braided vines and thorns. Tormund Giantsbane remained north of the wall, where the free folk now farmed mosses, kept herds of antlered goats, and wove tapestries in strange symbols. When ravens arrived bearing news, Tormund would chuckle and grumble. Letters from trees again, but he read them all the same, his voice catching when Leaf sent him one shaped like a curling snowflake. Even the Ironborn had changed. House Harlaw declared themselves keepers of the reefroot and allowed singers to settle amid their storm-lashed cliffs. Their fleets carried saplings in barrels beside salt and grain, and their captains swore oaths of memory beside iron and wood alike. But peace is never unchallenged. Far to the east, beyond the ruins of Essos, where once Slaver's Bay sang with chains and fire, a new power had begun to stir. On the island once known as Illyria, a crimson mist had begun to creep inland from the sea, and ships sent to investigate did not return. Refugees spoke of a tower of crystal rising from the sea foam, shaped like a spiral turned inward. Its light was not warm, but hungry, red as old wounds. The fisher kings of the Basilisk Isles refused to land near it. Sailors whispered of voices in the mist, speaking in riddles that promised immortality in return for silence. When news reached Old Town, the conclave sent Maester Varn, a learned man of letters and logic. He never returned. Instead, a flock of white crows arrived at the citadel, each bearing fragments of the same message, etched not on parchment, but on bark turned to translucent bone. The messages read, "We remember the fire that forgot. We remember the crown that wept. Now remember." Silence. Nup and me. The High Conclave debated for 10 days. Samwell Tarly argued that the memory blade once used by Brienne must be brought to bear again, reforged if needed. Some wanted to call upon the dragons. Others wished to seal the ports. But Bran sent a dream to all who sat in the conclave. A dream in which the citadel itself rose on roots and walked away from the world, leaving all books behind. That was enough. A coalition was formed. Singer Scouts, Leaf Knights, and the First Fleet under the joint command of Davos Seaworth and Lady Asha Greyjoy. They sailed east, carrying dragonglass, white saplings, and one vial of the Queen's fire. a distillate of Drogon's breath and memory-laced resin. On the 10th day, the mist parted. The ships beheld a land, no longer Illyria. The tower pulsed, and on its peak stood a figure that resembled a man, yet had no face. Only a spiral of mouths, each whispering a single word in countless tongues. Forget. The singers screamed, not in terror, but in song. The ships veered as if guided. One sailed ashore, carrying Sam, Brienne, and a singer named Mirabark, whose hair flowed like grass underwater. They walked inland through red fog that did not cling but remembered. Around them, the land shifted. Old cities glimpsed and lost again. Brienne's blade sang in her hand. Sam whispered prayers to the old gods and knew. They reached the tower base. There, they planted the white sapling. It did not grow. The tower pulsed. The spiral of mouths turned toward them. But then, Brienne knelt. She laid down her sword. Sam placed books, old, worn, full of grief and joy alike, around the sapling. Mirabark pressed hands to the earth, singing not a war song but a lullaby. The sapling trembled. One leaf unfurled, then another. The fog screamed. The spiral shuddered, and the tower began to crack. They fled as the sea surged in, washing over the broken base. As they sailed away, the island crumbled, and in its place remained only a single tree rising from coral, a weirwood, its roots drinking salt, its leaves red as memory. The mist dispersed. The sea calmed. And from across the world, every tree sang a note of return. It echoed across Westeros, into deep caves, high towers, riverbanks, and old holds. It passed through the wall, along the ice, and through the stones. And all who heard it remembered that they had once been one, that they were never truly alone, that so long as a single leaf remained, the song would go on. And it did, for leaf and claw and flame had kept their promise. And in the last quiet before the world turned again, the trees wept, not in sorrow, but in joy. Ka-un. Though the world had been spared from the silence that consumes, and the hollow shadow pushed back beyond the bounds of soil and sea, time, endless and impartial, marched forward still. The peace born of roots and memory did not dull the hearts of men, nor halt the ambitions that stirred beneath quiet earth. For even in a garden blooming with unity, weeds may rise, and winds may carry seeds both fair and foul. Atop the cliffside of Old Pike, where the ocean thundered in tides shaped like jaws, a figure cloaked in barnacle leather gazed out toward the east. Lord Dalton Harlaw, called the Saltrute Knight by those who followed him, and the Drowned Caller by those who feared him, had dreamed of the tree that swallowed a storm. He dreamed often these days, and each time the spiral turned more slowly in his mind. He had once been a raider, taught to despise roots and worship tide. Yet when the singers arrived and offered seed that grew in salt cracks and stone, something within his marrow turned. He now kept a weirwood sprout in a basin of sea brine on his war table, and its white leaves curled only slightly in protest. Some said he betrayed the old way. Others whispered he had found the oldest way of all. Dalton traced the blade laid across the map of islands, no longer iron but resin-bound steel tempered with coral. "It is not enough," he muttered. "The east is waking again, and not all winds come to bring ships." Behind him, 3 reavers stood in silence, armor crusted with scale, their eyes darker than foam. He turned to them. "Send ravens. We must call the mists worn." Far inland, in the dales north of River Run, the river sang brighter. Its banks were braided with violets, and frogs croaked beside moss-woven sigils pressed by children's hands. The new generation, born not under banners but under branches, were taught in both tongue and song. Lady Edmure's youngest, a girl named Sira, was said to speak with bees. When questioned, she only smiled and pointed at a honeycomb she kept wrapped in green wool, whispering, "They remember more than we." Maester Elthrin of Pink Maiden recorded these tales with a mix of caution and curiosity. "The realm," he wrote in his yellowed codex, "is no longer divided by crown and sword, but by memory and silence. Where memory roots, peace grows. Where silence reigns, shadows breathe. Name, Kamsai. In the far north, Ghost ran alone through the snows beyond the wall, his howls drifting across lands where no name had held dominion for centuries. He was not seeking, only listening. In the dreamlands, Bran rode with him, not as man or wolf, but as watchful presence bound to wind and root. They heard things stirring beneath the permafrost, whispers of forgotten pacts, and one great groan, as if a mountain sighed. Jon awoke from such dreams with his breath caught, and hands trembling. He would rise then, and walk the walls of Winterfell, whispering to himself of watchfulness. He wrote to Bran and Sam, letters that spoke of no threat directly, but carried tones of readiness, like unsheathed steel not yet raised. In King's Landing, Daenerys met with emissaries from the Summer Isles. They came bearing fruit that glittered like carved suns, and scrolls inked with birdsong notations. They offered alliance and a plea. A black fog had taken one of their easternmost isles. It did not kill. It simply erased. Whole groves of dreaming figs, gone. Songs sung for generations, forgotten. Names lost from mouths like smoke. Tyrion drank 3 cups of arrack and stared into the weirwood sapling blooming in the keep's open atrium. Not everything can be burned or buried, he said. What we forget may yet return to unmake us. Queen Daenerys summoned her war council. It now included singers, leaf knights, historians, and dragon wardens. She sent east once more, not with fleets alone but with fire entwined with root. Drogon, aging and massive, now bore a mantle of vine beneath his wings. He circled the horizon thrice and vanished toward the sunrise. Word came weeks later of storms across the known sea turning red. And then, silence. Months passed. Children born during the War of Roots began to walk. Their first steps were often toward the trees. In the Dornish borderlands, a sapling grew that bore blossoms only at night. Beneath it, a stone obelisk once buried in sand cracked open. Within, scrolls wrapped in snakeskin told of a prophecy lost before Nymeria crossed the sea. It spoke of a 1,000-year breath and a sun that forgets its own fire. The sand priests declared it omen. The singers declared it memory. The small folk declared it weather and went about planting beans. Across the narrow sea, in the free cities, something stirred. Old statues of Valyrian warlords began to weep black ichor. Bells in temples rang without wind, and every vine that grew atop rooftops twisted westward, as if reaching for something lost. In Bravos, the kindly ones opened a door never opened. A chamber beneath the house of black and white glowed with a pale green fire, and inside, Arya Stark stepped once more into shadow. Her needle gone, her eyes carrying the spiral not of death, but of promise. And the trees, as always, listened. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory. Leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. And still, they waited, for all things return. The first true summer since the age of silence crept quietly into the world. Sunlight lingering above meadows where bluebells and grass pinks competed with clover and golden dandelion. On the slopes above the green fork, old men leaned against linden trees, recounting to wide-eyed children how the world had once nearly vanished into hush. In the shade, young girls traced spirals into the earth with sticks, imitating the marks they'd seen on stones and tree trunks. Not curses, but the blessing of remembering. At Winterfell, Jon Snow watched the ripening fields from the battlements. From this height, his world seemed as vast and endless as the old stories. The ring of rebuilt walls, the mists curling over the marshy moat, the line of weirwood saplings flanking the godswood, their leaves still a softer red than the ancient tree at the heart. Ghost dozed beside him, ears flicking at the drone of bees, now a common sound in the north. Far below, boys and girls trained with wooden swords and bows, while their mothers and fathers shouted encouragement and warning in equal measure. Jon's hair had silvered more than he liked to admit, and his beard had grown wild since he'd left the last of the courts behind. The small folk called him Lord Snow still, but none insisted on king. He ruled by walking the fields and markets, by eating what they ate and sleeping as they did. Each day, letters from the south arrived, and he replied in careful script, always beginning with the words, "We are well. The roots hold." One such letter came by Singer Courier in early summer. The bark scroll was threaded with purple petals, its script looping and strange shifting color in the morning light. Sansa, now Lady Protector of the North and South, wrote of peace and trouble both. "The Dornish have sent grain," she wrote, "and Casterly Rock has traded iron for saplings. But there are shadows in the east, and the Tyrells worry at the edges of the reach." She ended with a memory, one Jon had forgotten, of Arya chasing him with snowballs, Ghost leaping at her heels. The letter left his hands shaking, and his eyes bright with tears he didn't want to hide. In King's Landing, Daenerys Targaryen strolled the rebuilt gardens of the Red Keep, her bare feet pressing cool earth. She no longer wore the silver and black of her house, but a simple linen dress the color of dawn mist, and her hair, streaked with gray, hung loose. Children followed her, chasing each other among apple blossoms and beds of blue hyacinth. Some carried wooden dragons, others wore wolf masks stitched from felt. Drogon, ancient and weary, basked in the sun on the broad flagstones beyond the city's edge, rarely flying but sometimes lifting his head to watch the children play. Daenerys ruled by consent and counsel. Her court, such as it was, included not only the wise and the noble, but the singer called Leaf, the former smuggler Davos, the young Lord Edric Dane, even a pair of wildling brothers whose jokes were as sharp as their axes. There was laughter in the city now, and gardens everywhere, hanging from window boxes, clambering up the pillars of ruined temples, sprouting from the very stones of the old throne room. The throne itself had long since melted into the earth, replaced by a heart tree whose roots wound through the floor and out into the city, binding it in a silent embrace. Tyrion Lannister kept the accounts, as he had always done, and ensured that neither memory nor grain went lost. He drank a little less than he once had, and his jokes, though softer, lost none of their bite. He kept a notebook filled with the names of the dead, and another with the names of children born since the peace. "There are more in the second book than the first," he told Samwell Tarly over sweet wine one evening. "Let's keep it so." Samwell himself had grown wide and content, his hair thinning, his eyes still bright. He served as maester of memories, collecting stories, songs, and old tongue phrases. Gilly ran the orphan house on Maiden Street. Their children, grown and fostered throughout the city, called him Sam the Singer and begged him for tales of the wars before the peace. Brienne of Tarth rode patrol between King's Landing and Maidenpool, the silver leaf of the Leaf Knights glinting on her cloak. Her page, a clever girl from Duskendale, had begun to compose a song about her called "The Lady Who Never Yielded." The words were rough, but Brienne smiled when she heard them and tipped the girl with a perfect white acorn. Arya's shadow came and went through the world. Some said she sailed with the Summer Isles fleet. Others claimed she walked among the faceless men in Bravos, a ghost teaching ghosts to sing. Every so often, a letter would arrive at Winterfell or the Red Keep, a page of driftwood with a single phrase, "Still watching." Bran, wherever he was, half in roots, half in wind, always knew when she had passed, though he never said how. South of Old Town, in the marshes where the ghosts of Hightower's old glory lingered, a new tower rose, not of stone, but of woven willow and glass. The conclave met there, the old citadel now a school for children of every land and tongue. Maester Miria, a woman of Summer Isles blood, taught her students the new tongue of the singers, and the old words of men. She believed that peace came from knowing not just history, but all the ways it could be told. In the Vale, Lord Robin's moon door remained shut, entwined with roses and honeysuckle. Instead, he held court in the Erie's garden, the high terraces now filled with thrushes and tame hares. The lords of the Vale, once proud and reclusive, now welcomed caravans from the Fingers and fruit traders from Gulltown. They grew new vines on old battlements, and the singers once feared now joined every feast. On Skagos, the wild clans, now calling themselves the Stoneborn, built great fire circles and planted saplings on the tallest cliffs. The island's children learned to hunt, farm, and sing to the whales. When the mists cleared, they sent gifts of carved bone and honeycomb to the mainland, and sometimes a delegation of singers who spoke of deep water and the songs of whales beneath the ice. North of the wall, Tormund Giantsbane grew old and white-bearded, yet still boisterous. He called himself the Root Keeper of the farthest north, and taught the free folk to plant groves along the old trails. Their children learned to braid flowers into their hair, to hunt and harvest and remember. The wildling camps grew into villages, and the forest crept slowly outward, reclaiming ground lost to ice and night. Yet peace, as ever, required tending. On the southern coast, ships brought rumors from beyond the summer sea. In the shadow of the fallen tower of Illyria, a settlement had begun to grow. Its people spoke a strange tongue, but their traders brought gold, glass, and memory stones, jewel-like pebbles that glimmered with shifting color. Some claimed they were gifts from the sea tree. Others called them tears of the spiral. No two told the same tale. Not all memory was sweet. In the ruins of Harrenhal, the sealed monolith still pulsed on some nights, a faint heartbeat that sent ripples through the dreams of those nearby. The singers maintained their watch, never sleeping, their voices raised in gentle song. Maester Edrin, a young scholar sent by the conclave, insisted that the monolith was weakening. "It is not evil, but emptiness," he told Sansa in a letter. "We keep it by remembering. Should the song fail, so too does the seal." Sansa sent a reply of gratitude and a white rose. There were other dangers too, a sickness in the marshes, quickly ended by the tea brewed from singerroot, a fire in Lannisport, quenched when a sudden summer rain fell from a sky gone silver with spirals. In Dorne, a false prophet gathered followers, promising to teach them the words that unmake. He was met not with swords, but with a circle of leaf knights and singers, who sang through the night until he wept and left the city, vanishing into the desert. In the east, the mists sometimes thickened, and sailors returned with memories they did not recognize. These, lost, found comfort at the temples where singer priests taught them to dream again, to let the world's song fill their emptiness. Not all could be healed, but none were abandoned. The oldest weirwoods, Winterfell, the Isle of Faces, even the wind-twisted heart trees of Bear Island, grew broader, their leaves denser and richer. The roots below the world grew thick as the wrists of giants. Sometimes in high summer, a faint music could be heard at dusk, not of flutes or lyres, but of wind threading through leaf and limb, the very air carrying memory across the world. One night, as the stars swept like silver dust across the sky, Bran's mind stretched wide and touched every living thing, from the tiniest mouse in the Skagos burrows, to the eagles wheeling over the eyrie, to the sleeping children of the free folk and the gentle heartbeats of newborns in King's Landing. He sang a single note into the dreaming earth, and every tree, every beast, every heart answered, not in words, but in the peace of belonging. Jon felt it too, waking suddenly beneath the weirwood's shade, tears damp on his cheeks. Sansa, in her solar, paused over her letters. Daenerys dreamed of her brother's song, and Drogon raised his head, ancient eyes glimmering in the moonlight. Arya, far away, stilled in the shadows, her hand pressed to the rough bark of a tree whose name she did not know. And in the marshes, Sam's youngest whispered, "Listen, the world is breathing." The next years unfolded like petals. There were festivals. Springtide and harvest, the song of the leaves, the river's blessing, the moon's day. There were marriages, and deaths, and births. Houses rose and fell, not by war, but by the weight of their promises and the songs they kept. The archives of the maesters grew so large they could not be housed in one city. Every keep, village, and ship kept a portion of the world's memory, never again to be gathered in one place. Once, in the deep of winter, a child was lost in the Wolf's Wood. The searchers despaired, for the snows were thick and the sky black. But at dawn, the wolves howled, and the trees bent their branches to point the way. The child was found sleeping beneath a sapling, curled beside a white hare. And when she woke, she remembered a song that the searchers had forgotten. Some believed the world's story had ended, that peace had become the only tale worth telling. But the bards and the singers knew better. Memory is a circle, they said, not a line. The song was not of ending, but of beginning, of change, of the old roots entwining with new growth. The world watched itself, and those who lived within it learned to watch too. And so it went for years, for a generation and then another, until the children born after the last war had children of their own. These new children were tall and strong, their hair bright as fire or dark as soil, their laughter ringing in the glades and meadows. They called themselves the Memory Keepers, the Peaceborn, the Song Children. Some could speak with bees, or with roots, or with birds that carried the tune of the world across the sky. Most simply lived and loved and dreamed. On a morning, rich with dew, the children gathered beneath the heart tree at Winterfell. Jon Snow stood with Sansa and Arya and Bran, and Daenerys beside them, her silver hair caught by the light. They looked out at the circle of faces, old and young, living and remembered. And Bran spoke, his voice as gentle as summer rain. "All things return." Sansa laid her hand on the bark. "And nothing is ever lost." Arya laughed, swift and wild. "So long as someone remembers, there will be wolves and dragons and trees." Daenerys smiled. "And children to tell the tale." Jon bowed his head, silent as always. And somewhere in the deep earth, the roots of the world grew deeper, their spiral unbroken. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. In every corner of Westeros, in every glade and city, river and hall, peace grew in the cracks of the old world, and the song went on. And the world at last was whole. Oni and Nawani. High summer drew a breath so long and deep that it seemed Westeros itself had fallen into a dream. Wheat ripened in golden seas beneath the walls of Winterfell. Orchards north and south groaned with fruit, their branches entwined with wild roses and humming with bees. The singer's gifts, saplings and seed pods, vine slips and tiny acorns, now thrived in every corner of the land. Even the shattered spires of Harrenhal blushed with climbing ivy, white and red blooms threading the black stone. The children of the realm, born after the War of Roots, had grown strong and clever, and their games mimicked the story of their peace. They played at planting trees and tending orchards, at singing with birds and speaking to wolves, and no longer at swords or battles. Their elders watched and remembered the old days, sometimes with a wry smile, sometimes with the secret ache that only memory can bring. At Winterfell, Jon Snow lingered beside the new heart tree at dusk. The sun flared behind its crown of red leaves, casting long shadows over the green. Ghost, old now but still alert, lay at his feet, his muzzle gray with years. Sansa, hair unbound and streaked with silver, knelt at Jon's side, tracing the spiral patterns in the moss around the roots. "We are changing," she said, voice quiet as the wind that moved the leaves. "The world is different now, and I do not think we could go back, even if we wanted." Jon nodded. "We couldn't," he agreed. "And if we did, the world would just turn again and bring us back to now. The trees remember, even when we do not." Now Arendski. Their words joined the gentle babble of the nearby stream and the laughter of children from the courtyard, and were carried through the castle by the early summer breeze. In King's Landing, the heart tree at the center of the Red Keep had grown broad and tall. Its roots curled through the flagstones, weaving among the old stones of the ruined throne room. Where once blades had jutted and the Iron Throne reigned, now grew wildflowers and clover, and the Queen's Council sat on carved benches of ash and chestnut, their meetings shaded by living boughs. Daenerys presided, a simple circlet of woven grass on her brow. Her silver hair was threaded with wild violet, her eyes softer and wiser than the firebrand she'd once been. Drogon, even older and more majestic, basked atop the keep's broken tower, his wings now vast sails of scarred, dappled hide. He hunted rarely, preferring to lie in the sun as the city bustled below. The children of King's Landing, who had once feared dragons and fire, now brought him baskets of honeycomb, sweet wine, and the occasional bold kitten, which Drogon accepted with a bemused huff. Tyrion Lannister, age etched into his face and limping from an old injury, sat at Daenerys' side, keeping the records and resolving disputes. He found himself less sharp-tongued and more patient, surprised to discover a joy in compromise and laughter. Sometimes when the council grew too serious, he'd rise and walk among the children at play in the shadow of the tree, teaching them riddles or reciting stories of Lannister wit and Targaryen dragons, and always finishing with the refrain, "Let the world remember what laughter sounds like." Brienne of Tarth visited the city often, still a knight in armor, but now also a revered teacher. She trained the next generation of Leaf Knights, showing them how to fight if they must, but more often teaching how to guard, to mediate, to nurture, and grow. Podrick Payne was her squire no longer. Now he commanded a watch over the Riverlands, beloved for his music and easy smile. On feast days, Podrick would play the harp and sing, while Brienne watched the crowds, her great sword across her knees, and felt the world settle softly around her. Arya Stark was a legend among the children, a shadow who appeared and disappeared, leaving behind feathers, bones, and driftwood tokens. She came home sometimes, always alone, always unexpected, bringing tales of the Jade Sea and the Shivering Lands, of islands where the trees grew so tall that clouds snared in their branches, and where the animals sang at sunset. The story went that Arya never stayed long because she listened for sorrow, and wherever the world cried out in pain or loneliness, that's where she would go. The Isle of Faces became a great gathering place for memory keepers. Bran the Dreamer, both there and everywhere, continued his quiet guardianship. Pilgrims arrived from all over, bringing small gifts. Song, shell, fruitite. The singers greeted them, weaving their stories into the green and the water. And at dusk, the music of flutes and voices rose, carrying all the way to the shores of the mainland. To the east, beyond the islands, the sea tree of Illyria still stood, now surrounded by new growth. Where once the spiral of silence had threatened, green shoots and coral had claimed the land. Sailors brought back stories of dazzling fish and floating blooms, of a tree whose roots shimmered in the surf and whose song healed the hearts of those who had forgotten their homes. The pearl merchants of the Jade Sea brought word of Arya herself, said to have sat beneath the sea tree, carving a story into its bark. A tale of wolves and dragons, of home and wandering. Dawn flourished. The night-blooming tree at Sunspear was tended by a new order of sand priestesses and singer lads, who guarded it with song and story, not blade. Blossoms were gathered at each full moon, and their tea was said to cure any sorrow of the heart. Merchants from the free cities made pilgrimage to drink beneath the tree's boughs, returning with peace and riddles in their eyes. The riverlands rebuilt in joy, memory and labor mingling in every town and farm. Lady Sira Mallister, the bee-speaker grown tall, traveled up and down the Trident, teaching how to graft fruit trees and lay out honey gardens. Her bees, black and gold, flourished everywhere, carrying news as well as pollen. Songs drifted from the water every morning, and no man, woman or child ever drowned unless they wished it. For the river always remembered. Beyond the wall, Tormund's sons and daughters built their own halls and villages, their feasts loud, their wisdom sought out by southern lords who wished to remember how to live simply and well. They bartered fish, fur, and tales for glass and ironwork, but most of all for seeds. In the northern spring, the fields there turned violet and gold, alive with flowers never seen before in the realms of men. The free cities transformed. Brydos flourished as the memory capital of the world, collecting songs and secrets, and exporting tapestries woven with silk and stories. The Kindred Hall welcomed all wanderers, and its gardens grew white roses in the winter and bluebells in the heat of summer. In Volantis and Lace, memory stones became currency. A tale well told could buy a home or free a slave. Slavery itself faded, not by war but by the slow, inexorable power of remembering what suffering had brought. Some in the world still clung to the old ambitions. Pirate lords, ironborn raiders, and a few exiled knights sometimes schemed or quarreled. Yet none could hold power long, wherever they built towers. The roots of the world crept in, splitting stone, bringing down walls, reminding them that all kingdoms fell in the end, and that the earth was patient. Through all these years, the singers moved quietly among the people. Never lords, never conquerors, simply teachers and witnesses. They mended what was broken, sowed what was needed, and retreated when their work was done. Sometimes a singer child was born to a human mother or father, and these children were wise beyond their years, quick to laughter, slow to anger, and beloved by all who knew them. The monolith at Harrenhal remained sealed, watched day and night by singer knights and leaf guardians. Once a year, on the longest night, Sansa, Bran, and Daenerys gathered there with their most trusted, singing the memory song until dawn. Each time the monolith's pulse faded a little more. In time, it became a relic, an artifact of a past that was no longer feared but remembered as a lesson. As the world aged, its people grew more curious. They sent ships around the far continents, discovering forests where the roots sang in 100 tongues, where trees glowed with their own light, and where every living thing was bound in a cycle of memory and return. Some voyagers returned with new seeds and stories, and these grew into a tapestry more complex and rich than any that had come before. One autumn, a storm rolled in from the Sunset Sea, flattening the western shores. The devastation was great, but when the storm passed, the people rebuilt with the help of singer roots and dragonfire. In the spring, a new kind of flower bloomed on the battered coast. A hybrid of 3 species, unknown before, white and gold and crimson, its fragrance carrying for miles. The old people called it the promise flower, and it became a symbol for every house, high and low. As old age crept upon them, those who had shaped the new world began to pass their wisdom to others. Jon Snow, wrinkled and white-bearded, sat beneath the heart tree, teaching children to listen for the music in the wind. Sansa gathered the leaders of 100 towns and taught them to rule by counsel, not decree. Daenerys passed her circlet of grass to her granddaughter, a fierce and gentle girl who called herself Friend of Dragons. Arya, if she was ever seen, was always smiling, eyes full of mischief and memory. Brienne trained the greatest knight of her age, a boy who stuttered when nervous, but whose honor was never questioned. Samwell Tarly wrote a final book, The Song That Binds, and made sure a copy was sent to every keep and hamlet, every ship and sept. In time, even the trees began to change. The oldest heart trees grew thick as towers, their faces worn smooth by the caress of wind and rain, their roots reaching deep into the bedrock of the world. In their shade, the animals gathered, and flocks of birds roosted, singing old and new songs alike. Then one evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and fire, the world paused. Every living thing felt a hush, a sense that the story was about to turn again. From Skagos to Dorne, from Braavos to the Shadowlands, every child and every elder stopped to listen. The wind rose, gentle and insistent. The trees shivered. The rivers stilled. The birds paused in their singing. The dragons, those few who remained, lifted their heads. And the children, newborns and young ones, the memory keepers and the leaf children, looked at each other with wide, wondering eyes. In that moment, Bran, the dreamer, now more root than man, whispered a word into the world. It was not a command or a warning, but a welcome. The world answered. Roots pulsed with new light. Flowers opened on cliffs that had never known bloom. The rivers sparkled, their currents running clear and strong. The stars blinked awake in new constellations. All through Westeros and beyond, the heart trees glowed, their faces smiling, their sap running gold. The animals gathered in circles, as if listening to an old friend. A new song rose, not just of memory, but of hope, of curiosity, of the endless dance between what was and what could be. The world, once so broken by silence and fear, now pulsed with promise. Jon Snow closed his eyes and smiled, hearing the laughter of his father and mother, the wild joy of his siblings, the kindness of Sam, the loyalty of Ghost. Sansa placed her hand on his shoulder, steady and warm. Arya's shadow danced in the corner of his sight. Daenerys leaned against Drogon's flank, her eyes alight with understanding. The spiral, never ending, began a new turn. So the song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. As night fell, every living thing dreamed the same dream, of green and gold, of wolves and dragons, of roots that would never let go, and a story that would never end. And in that night, the world was new. The world turned. Summer matured, ripening beneath a sky swept clean by rain and sun. Across the fields and forests, time seemed as gentle as a mother's hand, urging each blade of grass higher, each child bolder, each story richer. In the north, apples blushed red in wild groves that threaded from the wall to the white shores of White Harbor. By the rivers, boys and girls climbed willow branches, tossing pebbles and dares into the water, their laughter caught by the breeze and carried into the distant hills. Winterfell thrived as the green heart of the realm. No longer a fortress of war, it became a school of memory and peace. The Godswood, once a place of hush and dread, now welcomed all. Folk came from every kingdom. Vailman, Dothraki, Dornish, even the rare Ibbenese or Norvoshi, hoping for a word from the wise, a blessing from the singers, or simply to walk beneath the trembling red leaves, and feel the peace of roots and water. The Starks, Jon, Sansa, Arya, Bran, became less lords than gardeners, less rulers than keepers of the song. Jon was old, his hair gone white as birch. Yet his eyes were clear, undiminished. Each day, before first light, he walked the battlements, tracing the familiar stones. Ghost, slower but ever faithful, lumbered beside him, the wolf's coat now more gray than white, his steps careful. When children met them on the walk, Jon greeted each with a story. How the world had nearly ended, how memory had saved it, and how even a small act, planting a seed, singing a song, forgiving a hurt, could echo forever. The world does not belong to kings, he said to them all, but to the trees, and the water, and those who remember. Sansa ruled in all but name. Her council gathered every moon, a woven circle of lords and singers, wise women and merchant captains, maesters and leaf knights. Decisions were made by consensus, every voice respected, the oldest speaking last. Sansa guided with a gentle hand, steady as the seasons, her smile a promise and a reminder. The northern cities grew larger, yet not harder. Crime faded, not from severity, but from community and purpose. Orphans were rare, hunger rarer still, for every granary and hearth was opened at need. Bran was both here and elsewhere. His body, grown gnarled and thin, rested beneath the godswood. His mind moved through the roots and rivers, clouds and fire, knowing the world as a single vast living thing. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. Even the birds and the trees themselves seemed to hush, waiting. The spiral is not only of memory, Bran would murmur, but of hope. We shape it with our choices. Arya was the wild wind between all these roots. She came and went, sometimes on foot, sometimes by ship, sometimes in the company of strangers who never named themselves. She brought back stories of jungles where the trees sang in tongues older than men, of mountains haunted by spirits who could heal or curse with a glance, of cities built atop living reefs and ruled by councils of children. When she came home to Winterfell, she always brought a gift, a bright shell, a twist of silver, a fruit that glimmered blue in moonlight. The world is wider than any map, Arya said, and the children listened. The Leaf Knights flourished, their order now spread through every region. Brienne of Tarth led them still, her hair streaked silver, her armor softened by use and pride. The code was simple: protect the peace, speak the truth, hold the memory. Each new knight carried a white acorn set in their breastplate, and vowed not only to defend, but to plant, to teach, to listen. At King's Landing, Daenerys found her last years full of quiet. Her dragon, Drogon, was too ancient for flight, content to warm himself on the black stones by the sea. Daenerys, once the Stormborn, now called herself simply the Gardener Queen. Her time was spent tending roses, pruning fruit trees, instructing children and their mothers in healing herbs and dragon lore. She grew roses so red they seemed to bleed in the rain, and sweet pears that flourished only within the city's walls. Every piece is the harvest of an old sorrow, she would say, and every harvest is only the beginning of the next planting. Tyrion Lannister, aged and cheerful, still managed the city's accounts, still kept his sharp wit. His memory books, copied and recopied by apprentices, became prized heirlooms in every house. His grandnieces and grandnephews recited his jokes, and the city's orphans vied for the best Lannister tale. In the cool evenings, Tyrion gathered a crowd of young and old, telling the story of how the Iron Throne was melted, how he survived every fire, and how he came to find laughter sweeter than gold. In the east, Illyria's sea tree grew taller each season, its roots twining through coral, its crown flowering with luminescent fruit. Sailors called it the Lantern Tree, for it shone even on the darkest nights. Pilgrims arrived from all corners of the world to listen to its song, to drink from its briny springs, to dream beneath its shade. Some swore they heard voices in the leaves, beloved ones long dead, or the gentle encouragement of the singers themselves. The free cities were transformed, old rivalries softened by trade and memory. The memory stones of Bravos, each one a story, a song, a name, became as precious as coin. At the house of Black and White, the kindly ones tended a secret grove where every lost soul found a tree. Even the slave markets of Atlantis had faded, replaced by schools and gardens. The old tiger banners forgotten, the spiral now worn by all. Dorne's night-blooming tree became the site of a great festival, its petals gathered for love potions and poems. The riverlands thrived under Lady Cirrus bees, honey, and song their gifts to all. The marshes around Old Town filled with schools of children who learned the singer tongue before the common, their teachers gentle and full of laughter. But memory, even when gentle, is never idle. The monolith at Harrenhal, watched night and day, was now no longer a threat, but a warning. A reminder of what was lost and could be lost again. On the longest night, as tradition now held, the old council gathered. Jon, Sansa, Bran, Arya, Daenerys, Brienne, Tyrion, Sam, and all the children who had grown into leaders and memory keepers. They sang together, their voices threading through the ruins, their song weaving the names of the dead and the dreams of the living. The world was not perfect. Sometimes storms swept away the summer crops. Sometimes strangers arrived and could not be comforted. Sometimes anger flared and hurt was done. But always in the end, memory prevailed. Not as chains, but as roots. Every year, the memory keepers added a new ring to their trees, a song or a story or a stone, and the spiral widened. Old age took them, one by one. Jon was the first to lie beneath the heart tree and not rise again. His grave was marked by a stone carved with a wolf, a dragon, and the spiral of the world. Sansa died surrounded by children, her hands folded around a rose. Tyrion, ever stubborn, passed with a jest on his lips. Daenerys, in her garden, beneath the outstretched wing of Drogon, faded with a smile. Arya, they said, simply walked into the woods and became the wind. Brienne was the last of the first Leaf Knights, but the order never faltered. New generations took up the acorn and the vow, their names written in the memory books and sung at the council fires. The children of the new age grew up fearless. They built cities where the rivers met, blending singer roots and stone, glass towers entwined with green. They sailed west and south, planting seeds and stories, carrying the memory of what had nearly been lost. They healed the scars of old wars, not by forgetting, but by weaving even sorrow into their stories. Bran's song, which had begun as a whisper, grew so broad and deep that it filled the world. At last, as his voice faded, a new dreamer was born, and the song carried on. The spiral widened, not only in Westeros but far beyond. On the shores of strange continents, children heard the song and joined it, weaving their own tales into the rootwork of the world. The heart trees blossomed anew. The rivers ran clear. The dragons slept in peace, their dreams full of the world as it could be. No one could say exactly when the age turned. There was no battle, no breaking of the world. There was only a morning when the oldest child in Winterfell looked up and realized that the spiral, which once seemed so small and fragile, now circled the world. That the song which once trembled in the leaves now sang in every breath, every heartbeat. The world was new, and yet old as memory. The children laughed, the trees whispered, the rivers sang. Every loss was remembered, every love honored, every hope given a place in the story. So the song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. And the world, never finished, never broken, never forgotten, sang itself forward, ring by ring, dream by dream, into a story with no end. Ei, ka, kainun. Mist lingered on the moors of the north, clinging to the stones and willows, as if unwilling to let go of the world that had become so quietly abundant. In the hollows between standing stones and berry bushes, children hid and played, their laughter running ahead of them like startled sparrows. The old boundaries, once marked by blood and iron, had blurred. Wildlings and Northmen, Dornishmen and mountain clansmen, all mingling in markets and fields, their accents blending, their stories crossing until no one could remember whose song was whose. It was the dawn of another age. The old had become myth, and myth became wisdom. The youngest children, born into a world where the weirwoods sang and the rivers carried secrets, grew up believing peace was not only possible, but normal. Yet peace had its own demands. 1,000 small acts of patience and generosity, 100 unheralded choices each day, unnoticed by song or story. Memory was the new sword, kindness, the shield. At Winterfell, the roots of the ancient heart tree pressed deep and wide beneath stone and soil, its canopy casting shifting, dappled shade over the green. Bran was gone now. His passing had been gentle, his voice lingering in the leaves and wind, sometimes heard at night by those who kept late watch or woke from old dreams. In his place, the weirwood's face changed subtly. The smile grew, the brow softened, the spiral at the corner of one eye thickened, a mark of blessing. Sansa, herself grown silver-haired and stoop-shouldered but bright-eyed as ever, watched the new generation from her window. She wore her mantle only for ceremony now, content to leave the council to her granddaughter, who bore the wolf and the spiral side by side on her cloak. Sansa spent her days in the kitchen gardens, guiding children's hands to gentle work, grafting apple slips, stirring honey into porridge, or teaching songs to those too shy to sing on their own. The servants still called her lady, but the children called her Grandmother Green, and to her they brought every hurt and hope. In King's Landing, the Red Keep's garden court grew wild and thick, the roots of the heart tree now pushing up through the old flagstones, breaking them into mosaics of green and red and white. The city's children studied beneath the spreading branches, their teachers leaf knights and song mothers, maesters and wandering singer priests, all teaching letters and lore, weaving history with fable, arithmetic with music. Daenerys had passed many years before, her resting place beneath the roots, marked only by a patch of lilies and a drift of rose petals, replenished by the smallest hands each morning. Her descendant, a dark-haired girl with Targaryen eyes and a fondness for wolves, ruled quietly, her counsel as broad and tangled as the garden itself. The dragons were gone, but their memory lingered in carved stones, in stories, and in the careful husbandry of great horned goats and fire lizards, bred from the little drakes of the summer isles and made gentle by the patience of 1,000 hands. The old city, where once beggars starved in the shadow of the Iron Throne, now gleamed with green roofs and flowering walls, every alley strung with garlands and every market filled with fruit and song. The bell towers rang not for war or doom, but to signal the midday feast, when every house and shop, no matter how poor, set out bread and greens for any who wished to share. Brienne's order, the Leaf Knights, grew still. In every town and holdfast, their silvered acorns marked places of gathering, peace, and learning. New knights came from all lands, highborn and low, wildling and Dornish, boy and girl, old and young alike. Their vow, unchanged, to protect the roots, to remember, to serve not the lords of war but the circle of peace. They wore no crowns, but the acorn brooch on their hearts became as honored as any lord's sigil. Their stories, told beside the fire at every harvest, were of the time they planted a tree in a ruined field, or knelt in the snow to comfort a grieving stranger. Far south in Dorne, the night-blooming tree grew vast, its blossoms falling by the thousands each morning. The sap from its fruit became a balm sent to every sickbed in the land, and from its seeds, singers coaxed rare vines that flowered even in the hottest desert wind. The Martells faded into legend, their line continuing in the children of gardeners and minstrels. Their old halls turned to open sanctuaries for memory and music. The rivers of the Trident, once so often choked with war, ran clean and deep, their banks lined with bees and children. The free cities continued to change. In Bravos, the memory stones now filled a square mile, so many names and tales that even the oldest singer could not recite them all. The priests of the House of Black and White took in every wanderer, teaching that all lives, no matter how brief or long, added a note to the world's great song. Ships came and went from Illyria's lantern tree, the sea road now a ribbon of promise that drew pilgrims from every shore. Even in the far north beyond the wall, the last of the old wildlings taught the children the words of the first song. And in the summer twilight, as the sun circled but never set, the children danced beneath the white flowers of trees that had never grown there before. Sometimes they glimpsed shapes in the fog, the shadow of a dire wolf, the shimmer of a bear, a girl with a sword and a fox's smile. The world had grown wide, and memory moved everywhere. Not all was perfect. There were quarrels, small jealousies, sadness at the death of an elder or the loss of a beloved pet. Fields sometimes flooded or dried. The east winds brought storms and rumors. Sometimes, on a winter night, an old sorrow would settle in the bones of a singer or a lord, and the songs would falter, the spiral close a little tighter. The world seemed smaller and darker for a while. Yet always, the roots held. In the House of Memory at Old Town, Samuel Tarley's last book became a ritual. Once a year, in the green moon of spring, children gathered in every hall, every ship, every market, and Godswood. They opened the book and read. The world was made of stories and song, of loss and longing, of hope and remembering. What we tend will flourish. What we neglect will fade. The children listened, and when the reading ended, they sang together, sometimes badly, sometimes out of tune, but always together. As years passed, the heart trees grew taller, their faces gentler, their sap deeper gold. Pilgrims traveled from far-off coasts to touch the bark and whisper their names to the spiral. The old magics remained, but they became part of life. A garden's growth, a river's sudden kindness, a dream that warned or guided. The world spun not on fear or prophecy, but on the small acts of tending and forgiving. On midsummer's dawn, the people of the realm gathered at Winterfell. It was the first time in memory that every land, every city, every village and wandering band sent singers and children, leaf knights and maesters, smiths and shepherds. Sansa's granddaughter presided, flanked by her cousins and a great cousin of the Gardener Queen. The heart tree's boughs were woven with garlands of rose and fern, and at its base the singers sang in every language, old and new, their voices winding like roots beneath the earth. The day was for feasting and dancing and stories. The oldest told tales of ice and fire, of the Night King's fall, of dragons and ships and swords that turned to memory. The youngest recited riddles and sang songs of trees and bees, their words often silly but full of hope. At sunset, every pilgrim brought forth a seed or a stone, a letter or a memory. They placed these offerings at the foot of the heart tree, a mound of treasure far richer than gold. When the moon rose, bright as silver and full, the people lay down in the grass and the halls, in the fields and forests, and slept together beneath the open sky. That night, every person dreamed, not of old fears, but of running water, of growing things, of warmth and belonging. When they woke, they felt, deep in their bones, the pulse of the world, slow, strong, endless. A new song began to circulate, first in the markets of Old Town and Bravos, then in every inn and ship's galley, sung by laborers and lords alike. It was a song of the spiral, of the world that had almost forgotten itself, and then by patient effort and shared memory, had remembered. So the song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. And in every corner of the world, the story went on, not as a tale of endings, or even of peace alone, but as the daily work of hope, laughter, forgiveness, and the rooted certainty that what was tended would grow, and that all things, in their own time, would return to the song. K.A. Mist rose from the riverlands at dawn, curling over the meadows and winding through the barley that stretched in rolling gold to the horizon. In the hush of that early hour, the world seemed new-minted, as if the long history of Westeros had been folded and pressed into this moment, all memory and promise balanced on the blade of daybreak. On the road from Maidenpool, a procession moved at a gentle pace. Children in tunics of blue and green, a pair of old knights with acorn badges, women carrying baskets of honeycomb and apples, singers trailing woven garlands of willow and rose. The procession was bound for the summer moot, a tradition born in the peace after the last war, when the world decided that gathering for stories was as important as gathering for arms. This year, the moot was called to the Isle of Faces, where the heart trees glimmered in their ancient ring, and the lake mirrored the sky in its glassy expanse. People came from north and south, river and coast, free cities and islands. Ships from Westeros, small boats from White Harbor, even a fishing catamaran from the Summer Isles, all slipped into the green waters, sails dropping in silence as passengers gazed at the white trunks and red leaves, at the ring of faces waiting. In the shade of the trees, memory was not only preserved, but celebrated. Each group brought their stories. The Riverlanders, their tales of the blackfish and the silver trout. The Northmen tales of the long night. The Dornish their songs of wind and sand, and the night-blooming tree. The Bravosi sang of the stone that dreams and the sea that forgives. The children of Old Town recited the lineage of every sweetwater fish, and the Summer Islanders taught a round psalm with 300 verses, laughter spinning out in every tongue. The moot lasted 5 days. By day, the children swam and the elders debated in circles, the way Sansa had taught her council generations ago. By night, beneath the flicker of fireflies, the world's stories braided together. Each tale passed to another teller, each song picked up by a new voice until the boundaries blurred and the audience forgot who had begun which legend or who would end it. Some tales were as old as the weirwoods, some as new as the youngest babe in arms. On the 5th day, when the last story had been sung, the last basket of apples emptied, the singers gathered in the center of the green. A hush spread outward from them, rippling through the crowd, and the oldest singer, a woman with moss for hair and eyes the color of still water, raised her hands. "This is what the world is," she said, her voice at once young and ageless. "Not the sword, not the crown, not the root alone, but the story we tell together. Let each of you carry the song home. Let it root and bloom where you are." So the moot ended, and the world scattered again, each ship and caravan carrying away something new. In Bravos, children painted white spirals on the walls by the canals. In the north, the Leaf Knights held a tourney, not of arms, but of riddles and planting. Each winner granted a seed from the heart tree. In Old Town, a new tower rose, built not of stone but living wood, and the maesters planted their own heart tree beside the river, opening their house of memory to every child who wished to learn. In King's Landing, the gardens ran riotous. Flowers clambered up the broken towers. Fruit weighed heavy on the branches, and the city's laughter rang out from morning to dusk. The Gardener Queen, as she was now known, held court only in the cool of the evening, presiding from a circle of benches beneath the heart tree's canopy. The council was larger than ever, made up of merchants, singers, orphan mothers, former sellswords, and even a priest from the House of Black and White, who never spoke but who listened with perfect patience. Decisions were made in song, as often as in words. Sometimes, a shadow would flit through the garden. Arya, aged now, but swift, her eyes bright with mischief. She stayed only a day or two at a time, telling stories of the Far East, of Wales the length of castles and forests that sang in voices that shook the sky. Children ran after her in delight, and she always left some gift behind. A strange shell, a new riddle, a memory written on driftwood. Sansa, her days of rule long behind her, now tended a garden of her own in the foothills above Winterfell. She kept a cottage there, filled with herbs and scrolls, with dozens of kittens and a brood of noisy grandchildren. She taught them the wisdom of patience and the art of listening. And sometimes, when the mood struck, she would take them down into the city for the market day, her basket filled with gifts for every stallholder, her smile as bright as ever. The Leaf Knights, scattered across the land, grew into an order as varied as the world itself. In Dorne, they wore sashes of silk and challenged each other to duels of poetry and song. In the Stormlands, they built sturdy bridges and carved the spiral into every beam. On Skagos, they made peace between the clans with offerings of wild honey and the first berries of spring. Every year, they returned to Winterfell or the Isle of Faces, bringing seeds and stories, and every year the song grew longer, richer, deeper. Yet not all was peace and ease. There were years when the harvest failed, and others when a sickness swept through the coast. And once, a summer so long and hot, the rivers dried and the meadows burned. There were quarrels between villages, jealousies that flared, strangers who brought old angers and tried to stir trouble. Yet the roots held, the people remembered, and worked together, and each time, after hardship, the land healed a little faster. The monolith at Harrenhal, watched by a circle of singers and maesters, at last fell silent. On the anniversary of the last war, Sansa and the Gardener Queen, Arya and Brienne, and 100 Leaf Knights stood together, singing the song of the spiral until the dawn broke golden over the ruins. When they finished, the monolith was only stone, a memory of emptiness now filled and at peace. As the years slid by, the old faces passed from the world. Brienne, honored by every town and holdfast, died in her sleep, her sword and shield placed at the root of the heart tree. The acorn badge passed to a girl from the fingers. Arya vanished one last time, leaving behind her cloak and boots, a story scrawled on the inside of a shell. Keep wandering, the world is always wider. The Gardener Queen, old and silver-haired, was buried in the Rose Garden, a living bench grown over her grave. Sansa died with all her children and grandchildren beside her, her last words a blessing for every child yet unborn. But memory is patient, and peace, once rooted, can weather many storms. New generations rose, children who spoke the Singer tongue as easily as common, who learned the lore of Bee and River, who counted stories as the truest treasure. The rivers stayed clean, the cities bustled with markets and music. Ships from the east and south arrived every spring, and in the cold of winter, fires burned in every hall, and the story singers wandered from hearth to hearth, keeping hope alive. The world changed and changed again. In time, new lands were discovered, new songs composed, new hardships met and overcome. The heart trees grew broader, their faces worn smooth by 1,000 hands and kisses. The spiral widened, the story lengthened, and through it all the old promise held. So long as memory was cherished and kindness tended, the song would never end. So the song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. And the world, unfinished, unbroken, unforgotten, sang itself onward, root by root, ring by ring, dream by dream, into the endless bright morning. Okay, Wandandaris. Dawn shimmered across the newly planted orchards that spread in green and gold from the walls of Winterfell to the far edge of the woods, the dew sparkling like glass where old snows once clung for seasons without end. Beneath the branches, children picked early apples and learned the art of grafting from patient elders. Each slip of root or branch carefully added to a communal journal kept by the Leaf Knights and the Singermeisters. The world had grown quieter, not from loss, but from fullness, the hush of plenty after too many generations of want. Jon Snow was legend and memory, his likeness now carved into the archway that led into the Godswood, a wolf on one side, a spiral on the other. The memory keepers had learned to make music from the wind in the trees, from the humming of bees, from the gentle hush of water as it flowed beneath the walls. Winterfell was less a city than a living forest. The stone grown mossy, the roofs hidden beneath a riot of roses and wild grapes, the heart tree grown so broad that a dozen children could not join hands around its trunk. The oldest Leaf Knight, now called Lady Rowan, led her trainees on morning walks along the great spiral path. Each step was a lesson. To read the stories in the moss, to listen for the call of distant cranes, to spot the faint shadow of a stoat darting in the bluebells. Their armor was light, more for ceremony than battle, and their swords dulled with age. Most carried only pruning knives and seed pouches, their real tools the patience and attention that made every garden flourish. Arya's name was spoken as both blessing and mystery. Some swore she had sailed beyond the last islands, seeking the land where the sun set in fire. Others found her footprints in the snows north of the wall, or heard her laughter in the taverns of Bravos, or saw a fox with eyes too clever for any beast. The world was broad, and her shadow stretched wider than any map, but her message lingered. Remember and wander. The road is never closed. In the Riverlands, the old houses had become communes. The Tullys living beside the Mallisters, the Blackwoods and Brackens at peace. Each harvest and festival, a meeting of many kin. On the banks of the Trident, willow boats slipped quietly from one village to another, bringing news, bread, or the soft glimmer of honey wine. The beekeepers, descendants of Sira Mallister, were famed as healers and bringers of dreams. Their amber candles lit at every birth and wedding, at every vigil beside the dying. Bravos was no longer the richest city, but perhaps the happiest. Its squares filled with story peddlers, who for the price of a song or a kindness would share a memory stone, etched with laughter, grief, or triumph, each one humming with the faint vibration of the past. The House of Black and White had opened its doors, transforming its silent halls into a museum of peace, its priests now chroniclers and guides, teaching visitors to listen for the hidden harmonies of each life. In King's Landing, the Gardener Queen's heirs had set aside all notions of courtly intrigue. They governed from the garden court. Their council comprised of every trade and calling, beekeepers and potters, singers and maesters, orphans and old knights who remembered other days. The Red Keep had become a university of sorts, its towers filled with greenhouses, its cellars turned to mushroom farms, and the once feared dungeons now home to art studios and rehearsal chambers. Dorne shimmered, its deserts blossoming under the careful husbandry of Singer Root. The old Martell Palace was gone, replaced by a city of shade and fountains, its streets winding through groves of figs and olive trees, its plazas alive with midnight dances. The Sand Priestesses still brewed their teas, sharing the wisdom of the night-blooming tree with all who asked, and children wore veils of flowers to honor the moons. On the Iron Islands, the sea winds still howled and the waves still crashed. But now every ship bore barrels of earth, and from these, saplings grew, Zalt twisted but strong. The Saltroot Knights, born of Dalton Harlaw's dream, patrolled the docks with their spears wrapped in living vine, their oaths sworn not to take but to keep, to tend the shore and memory alike. The Isle of Faces drew more pilgrims than ever before. Some came for healing, others for wisdom, some simply to sing their names into the green silence and know for a heartbeat that the world listened. The oldest singers never left the ring of trees, their faces gentle, their eyes deep as the lake. Each year, the summer moot grew grander, 5 days of story and song, of contests in riddles and memory, each tale braided into the spiral that marked the turning of seasons and the keeping of peace. Beyond the wall, the free folk thrived, their villages now shining with fields of rye and barley, their children learning the runes of both men and singers. Tormund's descendants gathered each winter at the Ghost Fire Circle, singing of the long night, not as threat but as lesson, their voices rising to greet the auroras that danced in the sky. Mammoths were rare, but not gone. The old magics lingered, gentle and subtle, guiding herds and healing frostbitten hands, reminding all who wandered the snows that the world was a gift to be tended. Yet change, inevitable as tide and time, crept in. New lands called to restless spirits, and so the ships grew larger and swifter, venturing south and west, east beyond Illyria and north toward frozen seas. Some who returned brought new fruits, strange seeds, stories of floating islands and singing whales. Some did not return, but their memories were kept. A story, a stone, a song, folded into the world's widening spiral. The maesters of Old Town were now memory keepers first, their library open to all who could read or wished to learn. The House of Memory was a labyrinth of gardens and scrolls, its towers entwined with vines and lanterns, its lower halls home to wild deer and singing thrushes. Samuel's last book, The Heart of the Spiral, was copied in every tongue and read aloud at each festival and planting. "To tend the roots is to tend the future," he wrote, "for the tree does not forget, and nor must we." In every town and holdfast, each new year began with a gathering. Songs were sung, tales retold, and the oldest among them would plant a new seed at the edge of the village, pouring a little water and a handful of memories, written or spoken, sung or wept, into the earth. As the years passed, forests grew where none had stood, and with them, a sense that the world was not only remembered, but always in the making. On the 1000th year after the moot that ended war, a great bell was forged in Bravos, its metal a mixture of old swords, memory stones, and the coins of 100 kings. It was rung once at dawn, its sound carrying farther than any raven, and in its echo every heart tree in the world shivered, and every root seemed to pulse with light. That night, children everywhere dreamed of the same grove. A ring of trees, the faces smiling, the roots interlaced, the leaves humming with the song of memory. In that dream, a figure waited. Sometimes a wolf, sometimes a singer, sometimes a little girl with a wooden sword. The spiral never ends. The dream figure whispered, "Carry it on." So the song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath. The song of the trees echoed endlessly, folding memory upon memory, leaf upon leaf, breath upon breath, and the world, forever new, forever remembering, sang itself into tomorrow.